Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. For those watching, consent agenda meeting and then a workshop, so it's going to be a little bit different. But we would ask those who are willing and able to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to go ahead and get into our printed agenda of the order of business today. So, Madam Clerk.
Approve the minutes of the regular meeting on January 19th, 2021.
Does every member had a chance to review the the minutes? If every member had a chance to review the minutes, and if there is no discussion on the minutes, then I will make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. With the result of 5 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items 1 through 10.
Has every member had a chance to review the consent agenda? If so, is there any discussion on items on the consent agenda? If there is no discussion on the consent agenda items, then I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast their vote. The result of 5 yeas to 1 absent, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Report of Board of Bids and Contracts dated January 25th, 2021.
Welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Hannah Lane, Department of Finance, here for the Board of Bid recommendations from January 25th. First engineering bid we have is 2021 OP3 CIP Ultra Thin Bonded Overlay. Recommendation is Kansas Paving for the contract award of $4,544,800. Water distribution system to serve Clear Creek 4th Edition. Apex Excavating for $40,607. Overhead and walk-through door repairs on-call services. Group 1 Derby Overhead Company for $190,750. Group 2 DH Pace Company for $30,000. This is the purchasing procurement website, as well as our current open request for proposals. That is the Board of Bid recommendations. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Are there questions of staff on the Board of Bids presentation? If there are no questions or discussion, then I will make the motion to take staff's recommended action to receive and file the report, approve the contracts, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. With a result of 5 yeas to 0 nays to 1 absent, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Council member appointments and comments.
As we get into appointments, I do have one to make. So I will be appointing Stephanie Satrape to the Plastic Bag Task Force, and I'm almost sure I messed up the pronunciation of the last name, so I want to apologize to Stephanie ahead of time. Are there other appointments at this time? If there's no other appointments, then I will go ahead and make a motion to accept the appointments. Go ahead.
Second.
Appointments have been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. A motion to accept the appointments. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. With the result of 5 yeas to 1 absent to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Other appointments or announcements for the good of the group? Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one cool announcement. Councilmember Claycomb and I had a meeting yesterday and found out some cool information. So I wanted to publicly recognize Councilmember Becky Tuttle. She received the Distinguished Elected Official Award from the Kansas Recreation and Park Association. Eddie Feinstock from the Board of Park Commissioners received the Distinguished Board or Commission Member Award. Brent Thomas with the Wichita Parks Foundation received the Distinguished Volunteer Award, and the Wichita Parks Foundation Plates for Parks program received the Distinguished Public Service Award. So just wanted to shout out those individuals and organizations and say congratulations.
Congratulations to all the award recipients. Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you to the Vice Mayor. And I want to say, too, that I'm really especially humbled and proud to receive this, and it's been an honor to work with the Park Department for many years, long before I was in council, and that Councilmember Fry and Councilmember Claycomb also received this award, so that also makes it more special. But out of the 8 awards that were given, 4 of them were awarded to the City of Wichita, so it really highlights the exceptional work that our Park and Recreation Department does. So thank you again.
Other comments? See none. If there are no other comments, then we will, unless we have, just look towards legal to see if we have any executive sessions lined up. If not, then I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting so that we can get into our workshop.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. We will cast our votes. With the result of 5 yeas to 0 nays to 1 absent, we are adjourned, and now we are in our workshop. The chair recognizes Manager Layton.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, council members. We're here today to do some follow-up to work that you actually started back in June of 2020. And that time, you had a retreat that talked about our current ethics policies and about your desire to review those and to look at possibly moving forward with a new policy. During that retreat, just as a reminder, you talked about what ethical behavior would look like or should look like. You identified aspirations and also components that you would like to include in a new policy as we went forward. I'm just going to remind you a little bit of the aspirations, which are shown here on this slide. You wanted to build confidence that officials are doing the right thing. You wanted to create consistency in policy interpretation. You wanted to establish best-in-class guidelines. You wanted to identify guiding principles for conduct, and you wanted to value continuous training in ethics. When you said there were things that need better definition, some of the things you mentioned were gifts, meals, the concept of undue influence, conflicts of interest, disclosure, and enforcement. So based on that, on those comments that you made during the retreat, and then also in terms of receiving feedback from you over the last several months, I have in front of you today a proposed code of ethics. And I just want to indicate, this is a starting point. This is not considered to be etched in stone, but this is a chance for you to start a discussion about what you want to do in the area of ethics that builds on what your work was back last summer. So please keep that in mind, that this is your document when it's all said and done. It has to be something that you think is enforceable and that you're comfortable that it outlines your thoughts or best thoughts about ethics and ethical conduct. The way the Code of Ethics, and you all have a copy of the Code of Ethics, and I'm not going to spend this whole presentation reading it word for word. I'm going to hit some highlights for you, and I'm going to do a number of pause points so you can have discussions about each of these issues. There's a purpose statement, and there's a section on definitions, a statement of policy, which is fairly long. There's a discussion about exceptions to the gift provision, and this is important because it reflects some concerns you expressed during the retreat. Then there's a discussion about an ethics advisory board, education, which again you said was important in this process, and then whistleblower protection, which you didn't talk about in your retreat, but is common in modern codes of ethics. I'm not going to read all of this, but I will say the first paragraph here is probably the greater is your aspirational statement for this code of ethics. Government service and public sector employment is a public trust, and those who serve the public as part of its government must perform and discharge their duties consistent with the highest moral principles, serving always the best interest of the city and its citizens. And I think this is reflective of what you talked about in your retreat, and hopefully did capture your intent on talking about ethics. I'm going to go over some of the key definitions. There are more that are in your actual document. The first one is official, and I wanted to put that at the top because this applies to the enforcement of this document, and that is it applies to the mayor, city council members, and advisory board members of the city of Wichita. So once you know who the audience is, then I think it's easier to talk about some of the provisions that are in the document. There's a definition of conflict of interest, and the key there is that when you have a situation where an official has a substantial interest in the activity that would preclude them from acting on an ethical manner in the execution of their official duties, but it's substantial interest in activity. And we'll talk about how that applies in the policy statement. One of the things I know that you had concerns about is donor and how you define donor. And so in this case, it's an individual business organization that gives or presents an official with something of value. Pretty simple definition. Another one that I know is was involved in your discussion at your summer retreat, and I know is difficult to define, is friend. We did the best that we could here, and using some materials that we were able to get. A friend is an individual that has a close connection with an official formed by frequent social interaction. The keys there are close connection and frequent social interaction. I'm going to pause on this slide because you've got 4 concepts here, and a few of these are ones that I know that you wrestled with during the retreat discussion, and I'm not pretending that you've got perfect definition here by any means. So I don't know if you have any questions or comments, things you want to talk about on these 4 definitions. And again, we're in a workshop, so just please feel free, Jeff.
I guess my concern would be lack of a metric with the definition, because it would seem it's kind of up to interpretation. You know, if a board is, well, you know, I've seen them out and about, or I don't know how you define that friendship connection.
Yeah, I would say.
You know, I don't know, do you meet this person once a month? You know, that's a tough one. Did we have any benchmark examples from other cities, how they would define a friend?
Councilmember, we were not able to find any clear definition of friend, right, from what other cities are doing, and in fact had to go more to combining almost dictionary definitions. Normally, it's as simple as a close connection, but that didn't seem to apply in this case, because you could have a childhood friend, someone you've been buddies with forever, who doesn't do business with the city or who you don't see that often, right? So that's why we put the frequent social interaction in here. There isn't a metric. You could define it if you'd like. The idea was to try to narrow it as much as we could to try to be fair in that definition. But I have had this discussion with several of you, you know, during the last several months, and I know this isn't still a perfect definition by any means.
Well, and just to kind of, oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Councilman.
no, I was just follow up.
No, please go ahead.
That's kind of always been the issue of how do you define the friend.
Right.
So
Right.
I think it'll be something we can continue to discuss. What are your other thoughts?
Councilmember?
And also you mentioned that, you know, somebody that maybe was a childhood friend, but they don't do business with the city. But, you know, there are people in the community that I've known for 19 years that do business with the city. And so we do connect and have lunch, you know, every couple months or whatever. And so I understand it's nebulous, and it probably will always be. I mean, it's not something that's, you know, concrete, but it would be hard to think about having to dissolve 20-year friendships, you know, because, so just a thought.
Well, and I think it's as we go forward and talk about the policies, right? It doesn't say you have to give up your friends.
I understand.
What it says, though, is what you have to do if you have someone who you have frequent social interaction with and close connection.
And I get it, but just for the community. And this is, again, in the weeds, but I did make a note that the mayor, city council, and advisory board members, and if we move forward this policy and it's adopted, just how will we communicate that with our many, many advisory board folks that we have?
We'll talk about that towards the end.
So I know, but I was just kind of highlighting that. That's interesting.
And I do want to point out the conflict of interest definition is probably
the important one here, because you could have someone that you're friendly with or you consider a friend, but as soon as, or someone who's an acquaintance, but as soon as it reaches, I think, the conflict of interest situation, that applies to folks who I think some of us would consider friends, or if we had previous relationships with. It's more about, the policy is more about discouraging, I guess, due or preferable treatment or favors for folks who we might have closer relationships with. So the conflict of interest and the language that pertains to that, I think, is that language that provides a barrier between, I guess, a friendship and a acquaintance.
Right, and that'll be the next step of the presentation, is when we actually get into the policy statements.
One additional thing, you know, we have various accusations around the word, or I guess donors, but there's nothing that specifies like contributions to your campaign.
Right.
I know that something of value could be that, but that's not explicitly stated.
Right.
I'm sure maybe some folks in the community might want that word somewhere in there.
The mayor and I have had this conversation, and I'll let him elaborate, but I think it was clear as we were putting this together, there's a difference between campaign finance and campaign rules and regulations and codes of ethics. And so if you want to move in that direction where you're talking about the influence or impact of people who have contributed to a campaign, I think that's a separate document and a whole separate policy discussion.
Okay.
Not that it doesn't merit that discussion, but we're trying to keep these somewhat siloed, because otherwise it can get really complex.
And I think that's a good idea, but I think maybe somewhere in this document we should say that, because I wrote a note, how do we separate campaigns from council business? And so this says donor, if someone makes a donation to my campaign, is that part of the ethics policy? I'm trying to figure that out. I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just trying to figure it out.
I think you need to have that policy clear on campaigns.
Right.
And reference that here. And until then, I understand your point. I think you need to show an exclusion that we're not talking about campaign-related, either campaign finance or regulations.
Right.
And that's important. The definition of a donor under Kansas statutes that regulate campaign finance will be different than the one under this ordinance if it goes forward. And it's I'm not sure how, with Councilmember Claycomb's point, I'm not, something we can work on is how do we make that clear, but, a donation to a campaign for the purpose of an election is obvious, but if we give a proclamation to a nonprofit group or community group out here and they give us a t-shirt, like that's not a campaign donation, of course. T-shirts also, cost $10. That's a different type of donation and falls under the ethics reform than the campaign definition of a donor.
Yeah, I understand that. I just think we need to make reference to that we make sure that those are two separate things.
Right, and I know there are people that want to mesh those together,
Yeah.
but it's taking us a very long time to get to this point, just simply focusing on code of ethics and what is typically in a municipal code of ethics. So
Right.
I'm not saying that you don't want to take that other issue on, that's all up to you, but I'd like to keep this as pure as we can.
Yeah, and
But I think it's a great point, and we will make a note of that.
So I recognize this is a code of ethics. This isn't the law.
Yeah.
But Mayor, what's the situation in Topeka? I'm just asking you as being a former legislator. What were your rules as to when you couldn't vote on an issue because of a campaign donation, or is there?
So in Topeka, the legislature falls under really multiple layers. So you have the campaign finance, which only regulates campaign activities, and we fall under that as well. At this point, we haven't made anything tighter. We're pretty much in line with campaign finance. And then you have the House rules or the Senate rules, and those are their own rules of the governing body, and then of course committee rules, and that outlines behavior. And then we fall under what's not addressed under the House rules. We actually fall under Mason's code of decorum when it comes to following ethical standards and practices. So in the House body, it regulates itself. If someone was to break one of these standards, even break decorum, then decorum includes, I guess, anything that would be listed here. Then they could be reported, and the House would initiate an investigation similar to what this policy does, and then a body could take action against that member. So in short, there are two separate forms of policy, from campaigning to code of conduct and also ethics that are enforced within the governing bodies in the House, the two chambers.
So there's not a such thing as, I can't vote on this because they contributed to my campaign?
No. So, and I want to kind of point that out. There is, but it's also a little tighter, where in Topeka, representatives and senators will actually take donations from both sides of an issue. Like, it just, in my experience, $500 of a donation for like a $50,000 campaign is not enough for someone's integrity, even in Topeka, right? Like, so usually the conflicts weren't really associated with donations. Usually the conflicts of voting were more associated with, I guess, a partisan set of values versus a district set of values. Now, in Topeka, I will also say, and where I think this policy tightens up the loose ends at the city level, that in Topeka they don't really deal with, is in Topeka that there's strict gift limits. So the idea of a donor here being identified in this policy, really, when we talk about things of value, in Topeka, there's, I think, a $50 gift limit. So and entertainment limit as well. So if you wanted to take someone out on an outing or for some type of experience, that not only is reported, but there's a limit to that. So I've gone out before with legislators for, let's say, a basketball game, and then actually paid for the game, paid for all up to like the $50. And here, we have no limits for gifts. We have no limits for experiences, for going out to an event or something. So that is usually, I think, where the undue influence may occur, is through that type of relationship building. That in Topeka, because of their rules, they don't see a lot of that. But it's usually not so much coming, in my experience or in my opinion, from who donates to you. It usually comes from who takes you out, I think that those type of relationships are more what needs to be, I guess, reported and brought to light, and that's what this policy does.
Anything else on these definitions?
Just one, I have just one other. I just want to go back to the definition of friend, because I think that my definition of frequent might be different than someone else's definition of frequent, and so I'm trying to figure out if that came to be an issue, how, I know we're going to talk about the advisory board later, but how they, or the ethics board later, how they would interpret that, because again, everybody can interpret it differently. And I think about, there are people that before I got on city council, I did have frequent social interaction with, but because now of my position and just the limits on time that I have because of what city council takes, I don't really see people anymore. And so is it past frequent social interaction? Is it, is it current frequent? I'd like to hear from my other council members, really, not from you, Bob, because you have your own interpretation of frequent too, right? Okay, exactly. But I'd like to hear from my other council members, because as you said, this will be our policy. And I think we need to understand what our intent is.
My feeling is I don't feel like this is a good definition, and specifically because of the reason Councilmember Tuttle brought up. if this is an old high school buddy, and I don't have time to see you, I haven't seen you in 5 years, but if they come to you for something, that could be something, hey, these guys, he was best man in his wedding. They haven't seen each other for 20 years, but he's going to vote for this, and because he can get around the definition.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that's right. That definition would say that person, you don't have frequent contact with
Right.
them, so they don't qualify as a friend. You'd have to determine whether or not you're comfortable with that ultimately.
So I think we need to continue to work on that definition.
yeah,
I also struggle because, in this role, you have various organizational leaders or business leaders that just want to meet with you. So
Right.
if they regularly are talking to you, and it's not necessarily about a project, they just want to keep that relationship with you, is that now friendship?
Guys, I do want to point out there's nothing in the ethics policy that prevents anyone from having friendships. It's recognizing and checking the bias on, is that friendship causing undue influence that particularly, on a vote that might particularly enhance that person's, I guess, benefits. So I just want to point out, like, it's not so much having friends with folks who we interact with, having a friendship with them, is seen as unethical. It's the combination of, because of the relationship with this person, is that causing, I guess, an advantage for that person? And by having it in this policy, it allows us to stop and think about that first, to kind of check our own bias. And if so, then, and if the friendship's close enough, then perhaps abstaining from the vote. So I just do want to make that clear that we're not, I don't want to get too far into, I guess, splitting hairs with.
And I sense that some of the concerns aren't about your own interpretation, but the fact that there's an independent enforcement body. How are they going to look at this? And there is no body of work, so there's no definition by that group. So I understand what you're saying, and that's obviously a good context for trying to define definitions. Councilmember Blubaugh talked about metrics. The more specific you are, the more guidance you're providing to that group, right? So I get that.
well, maybe sorry, Manager, but maybe as we move through the more discussion of this policy, we'll see where it's referenced, and that will help us.
Yes.
So,
I also would say that today, because of Zoom, you probably don't have much social interaction with anybody. So this is, but anyway.
I do want
okay.
to highlight, though, really quick, that my comments it wasn't necessarily from council. I'm looking at this from the perspective of the citizen and things that I have experienced over the last 3 years and what's been said about the council. So although I get what this friend is for me, I have my own interpretation of it, and it sounds similar to the discussion we're having. It's what will a citizen say is your friend, and will they consider all of these lunches or coffees or whatnot with these folks who then come before council, and will they consider that those conversations plus a, let's say, almost perfect application that goes through and maybe gets a unanimous vote, will they then say that's because I was a friend? That's the perspective I have right now.
No, and so this needs more work. Your thoughts after this, as the next few weeks as you think through that would be great, so that we can put something together for your additional review. Okay. Let's move on to some other key definitions. Another one you said you wanted to define better was gift. The key here is that someone who's giving a good or service, that they are conferring the gift that because they have a special interest in the city or an interest that may be affected by the performance or non-performance of the official. That's the key phrase in this gift piece. A lot of talk about family, and so it's not uncommon in codes of ethics to put in a definition of family or relatives, and so this is a common one that I've seen in other codes of ethics to provide guidance. And then we have to recognize that the issue of ethics is ever evolving, and there are things that would not have been in a code of ethics 10 years ago that really are probably more pertinent today. And that's where this issue of cyberbullying comes in. It's defined as any intentional electronic act that is sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive that it creates an intimidating, threatening, or abusive environment for an official. And then there's a listing of the electronic means in which that could happen. This really stems back to the first statement of policy that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, that talks about being dedicated to the ideals of honor and integrity in all public and personal relationships. So this is, when you see it in the statement of policy, the reference to cyberbullying, you'll see the reason for it being called out.
Actually, Mr. Manager, there's no mention of cyberbullying in the final draft of the policy that we've been presented.
Actually, there is, Mayor.
There is, you
Yeah.
added it.
Yeah, it's in there. It was requested by council members. Much of this has happened. This has been evolving as I get feedback from all of you. So I sent that out a week ago.
Version 12 that was presented?
I'm sorry?
We had draft 12, and my understanding
No,
was...
it's draft, you should have draft 13.
Oh, you had a draft 13.
Yes.
I wasn't given a draft 13. Can you describe the differences between draft 12 and draft 13 then?
Yes. It's the, and I've got that here. Did everybody get that draft?
My
This is
packet
13?
doesn't have it in it that I can see.
Yeah, we got a
but-
packet.
Yeah, we all got the.
It's in your packet,
It's
right?
Yeah, we got a packet of it.
It's shown there in that draft, right?
He hasn't.
Oh. This was added. My understanding is we were going to have a discussion about amendments to this after, I was emailed draft 12. This looks like draft 13. I thought we were going to have a discussion of amendments and not just have them thrown in here. But I'd be interested to move forward with the discussion. I just
Sure.
don't like being blindsided.
Not intentional by any means. I'll stop at this slide. These are 3 other key definitions. More than happy to get feedback on those before we get into the discussion of statement of policy.
I had a technical one. The mayor, his legislative language always makes me think about these words. So in relatives, it says at the end, and any other relative living in the same household. Does and or the word or change that?
I have to ask the city attorney.
That's a good question.
It appears that the definition is to be very inclusive. I think you could have a broad reading, so it could include anybody else who lives in the household, who is, it doesn't define, past that, but I think it's to be inclusive. I don't know if that answers your question.
A little bit. I've heard and learning from the mayor that sometimes and or may have more weight for consideration.
Yeah, in this case, I don't think that would have a weight or bearing on the definition. Sometimes and or does, but I don't think in this situation it requires the all. I think it's just, it probably means or.
Okay.
We could probably adjust that.
And what about a relative in a different household? Because it says same household.
Yeah, that would not be included in this definition. So if there's a relative who doesn't meet the prior terms, but who does not live in the household, that wouldn't be in this definition. So for say an aunt,
I'm going to follow up on that. I didn't think about this earlier, but this is a definition with the word that's being defined in the definition.
Yeah, it probably should say family member.
Yeah, something it needs to, if we want it to be, otherwise you don't need that,
yeah.
Right.
a relative.
If you want to not include anyone else, for instance, you could have a cousin, I guess, that lives in your household. If you don't want this policy to include them, then we can just drop it at a grandchild.
Yeah.
And just stop it there.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Do that, drop that, okay.
So I guess I want to go back. I assume the reason that we're defining this is because we need to recuse ourselves from any vote that directly benefits any of these individuals?
That would be correct. as you move forward.
So uncle living with me is okay to vote for something that benefits them?
That's good point. My concern with this definition of relatives is actually somewhat of a reference to the discussion we had about friendship, right? Like where I have Facebook friends who, we might interact on Facebook from high school, haven't seen them in 15 years. Is that really considered a friend if we kind of get into relationship status? Relatives, you might have someone who's not a brother or sister, sister-in-law, brother-in-law that lives with you, like an uncle who might be played the part of a father, right? But technically they're an uncle, and without the other relative living in the same household, the living in the same household might actually be a reference to that closer relationship that might cause a bias towards that person.
Bob, I'm probably not going to say this as varnished as I should, but the part about living in the same household, if you have a child, they may be in college or, 40 years old and not live in your house, but they're still your relative. So I'm kind of leaning towards living in the same household. To me, doesn't seem, either they're your relative or you're not. It's not proximity, it's your kin, not your proximity. But that's just my thought.
I think it's a matter of degree of family. How far do you want to go? This is as inclusive a definition as I've ever seen. I've never seen one that goes beyond these relationships. Doesn't mean that they don't exist. I just haven't seen that.
Well, I like the term family member. That gets all manner of things. We're not talking cousins in here either. And maybe if you had a cousin that was a big-time contractor at some point, So I think family member is maybe a better way to go.
So leave it as any other family member living in the same household?
Or just any other family member, period?
Well, then you don't need a definition other than, because what does that mean? I don't know what that means. How far do you go with any family member?
I get it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a reference to relationships. It's not so much, someone calls me with the last name Whipple, it turns out Ancestry.com linked us together generations ago. You really don't know this person. Are we technically related? Technically, does that now disqualify this person from, doing business with the city? It's really about undue influence is the intent of this definition.
Right. I think the example Councilmember Bluebog gave is the one, that somebody living under your roof, even if they're a cousin, but the fact that they're with you day in and day out, that would be caught in this. And that, I think, you were talking about, I think the Vice Mayor talked about perception of the public, right? So, I leave it up to you how inclusive you want to make this, but.
One of the things I'd like to suggest on this policy is that in a year, we come back and evaluate it. So, because I think there's probably going to be some things where we say, oh, we should have been more strict on this, or maybe we should have been more lax. And so maybe not getting this just tightened down to exactly what we want. In a year, we can come back and say, okay, we've got this just right.
In a year, you might not be here.
That's true. I might not be, but another council member would
if
be.
the policy, depending on if we're not.
Yeah, that's right.
I will point out that this policy is based on best standards and practice, so I think that although we're going to have adjustments that we're going to need to do, these definitions are standard throughout the body of work that has been used as the example for ethics definitions.
Okay. Anything else on this page? All right, so let's just jump into some of the key statements that are in the statement of policy. And as you know, it's significant. It goes from A to Q, but I'm only going to highlight a few of those. The first one is what I would really call your guiding principle, and that I referenced a minute ago, be dedicated to the ideals of honor and integrity in all public and personal relationships. And when you think about it, that really ties back to your purpose statement as well. The second one talks about avoiding conflicts of interest, and this is always common in a document like this. And that, I'm going to read this piece. It's refraining from participating in decisions or being involved in transactions in which officials, their family, friends, or business entity have an interest. If for any reason involvement cannot be avoided, the official must make a full disclosure of association. So that's when your definitions come into play in terms of the conflict of interest. And again, it doesn't say that you don't, it doesn't, I almost said it wrong. It says that you have to disclose that association if you can't avoid it, right? And in your past practice, what that has meant is that you recuse yourself, right? And you indicate the reason why. We don't have a process outlined here like that, but that is what has been common practice in the past.
I have a question on business entity, because I don't think, and I should go back and make sure I understand. We don't have a definition of business entity. I was just trying to figure out if business entity means ownership interest or employee of the business. I think Jennifer's going to comment here.
Well, the policy doesn't seem to define it, but I will point to state statute. The closest thing we have in the statutes that talk about substantial interest under the state statute, it defines business as any corporation, association, partnership, proprietorship, trust, joint venture, and every other business interest, including ownership or use of land for income.
We'll go ahead and put a definition.
As a definition, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. It'll be consistent probably with what Jennifer just read.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to keep going through the statement of policy and then stop when I get to the end of my slides on this piece, and then let you kind of go through all of that. The next one talks about refraining from unduly influencing boards, commissions, and city staff on projects that benefit private parties. The next one I know is one that is going to require some discussion. This would prohibit officials from taking any gifts in excess of $150 from a specific donor within a 12-month period. And it also has a requirement to report any gifts valued at $50 or more on a yearly basis. And those will be filed with the Ethics Advisory Board Chair. Now, we can come back to that. The next talks about refraining from patronage or interfering in the hiring process. Next one after that is remaining impartial in the consideration of city business, including the approval of public policies and public contracts, and then not being unduly influenced by family relationships, business interests, and some of the other things that we talked about. And then the concept of cyberbullying comes in here, where it is prohibited for an official to participate in that activity. And then it talks about electronic communications in that regard as well. And then the next one is something that was requested during your retreat, and that is, how do you handle events for nonprofits, educational institutions, and others that invite you to attend their event and are willing to pay for your presence at that event? And this provides an exception to the gift policy that allows you to attend and participate in that activity. And then the last piece of this is that should there be a gift that's not authorized, you either would return it to the donor, or you could give it to the city treasurer, who then would go ahead and liquidate that asset, so to speak, and return the proceeds back to the city. Why don't we pause there? These are just some highlighted sections from the statement of policy. And as I said, there's a number of items here, so there may be others you want to talk about as well.
First on the gift, I want to make sure I understand that. So under this, educational institutions would be okay to go to an event. So you could go to a Shocker game with someone, but you couldn't go to a Wind Surge game with someone. Would that be correct?
Can you say that again?
I think it's going to depend on your interpretation.
Okay, well, yeah,
Right.
I'm just throwing it out there.
So the purpose of this is to allow, as council members, we get invites to go to events that actually benefit the folks who are organizing the event. So it's not so much to benefit us. So for when you put in educational institutions, let's say you get invited to WSU Tech to give a speech to the class, and afterwards they, during the speech, they also are serving a lunch. This would allow you to do that and have lunch because it is part of really the service of an elected official to be accessible to nonprofits, educational institutions, and so on. But that was the context when this provision came up, was how do you draw the line so that we can still go out and be an asset to the nonprofit community, to the educational community, to political policy-based organizations, but it really wasn't, I guess, designed with the lens of us going and enjoying either a basketball game or a baseball game. I think that still would fall under the $150 limit.
On the,
That's where we need your guidance, what your intent is.
I mean, I guess I just have to ask the question, does the community want electeds out there at those events?
They do, and it's just different if you want, and that's why this was put in, but it's different if you want to be invited to, I guess, a golfing event. The community doesn't really want us golfing with our friends, than going to a nonprofit's fundraiser event where they want to advertise that an elected official will be there and we can give a proclamation on behalf of the city and do business that is associated, I think, with the intent of being elected. So it's trying to find that line.
Well, I think that's a good discussion to have because there are nonprofits that have athletic events, golfing tournaments or whatever, that could invite you to attend, want to be able to say, the mayor is going to attend this event. Is that, what, Mayor, your interpretation is that would not be acceptable. I think others would say.
That's not my interpretation. I think that would be, because that's an event hosted and that seems like a public event in which they would have the mission of either promoting the organization. That is different. Like an actual event is different than a private outing with a nonprofit or educational institution. That's what I'm trying to make the distinction. Where the intent of this section isn't to be a loophole so that the board of a nonprofit organization can take you to a private outing and spend money on you because they happen to be a nonprofit organization. Instead, we're talking about the events in which your presence brings value to that event.
Mayor, can I ask you a question? I know you have a lot of experience with this in Topeka, and when you talk about the portion about the reporting piece of it, how did that work in Topeka? Who does the reporting of this list of things, gifts, gratuities, hospitality favors, or anything of value? Who does that reporting?
So, and this is one of the things that I think would be tougher for us. If, let's say, a lobbyist, someone who represents a group, takes out the council to dinner, let's say the lobbyist is the one who does the reporting. So we don't then report that we went out, they do that. Since we don't have any type of lobbyist provisions here, anything I think is above $50 would have to be, would be beholden to disclose that. Just like, similar, we already do some of that with our substantial interest form. If something was to constitute actual income over $500, similar to that, we would be responsible to disclose that.
And so I think the intent of this, it's the one that's avoid the appearance of improper influence, this one. The intent of this is a cumulative $150 over a 12-month period. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the logic behind that was pretty much following the lead of Topeka, which you're in session for about 4 months, and it's a $50 limit. And so here we have the full year that we are working. So just roughly about 4 months in Topeka, $50, times that by 3, that brings us through a year. That was how we got that number. So that, I mean, that could be obviously negotiated if folks have I guess, input on that. But that was roughly where we got it, was just basing it off Topeka's number. And also Topeka's number of $50, I think, was decided in maybe the 90s, and it has no ratchet on it. So it was decided at a time when you could go to a KU game. This was pointed out to me, and it would cost you $20. Now you can't get a KU ticket for less than 100. And they'll never vote to increase that number, but the $50 then was seen as more value than it is today.
So Bob, I have a question on this one too, and if this is a silly question, I'm sorry, but it's not very clear in my mind. So for this one, the word hospitality. So let's say that I have someone who's a friend, and I've gone to their holiday party every year for 15 years, but now I'm on council and they do have business with the city. So I would have to disclose that I'm, like, somehow report that I'm going to that party? Is that considered hospitality?
There's an exception for food, I believe.
What was that, Mayor?
Say it again, Mayor.
I believe in a policy, and I don't know if it's in a future slide, I think there's an exception for food. So in a holiday setting where you have a social gathering and you're eating, I guess, I don't know, hors d'oeuvres, then I don't think you have to keep count of every hors d'oeuvre you eat and then put a monetary value. If you're at the holiday party and they handed you a large, expensive gift, then you'd have to report that, I believe is.
If they handed me a large, expensive gift, I'd give it back. But, so, because my question is, let's say that I get invited to a holiday party, am I supposed to say, how much does this cost? And they may not even have the total individual cost broke down because they're paying for 200 or 300 people to be there. So I don't want to dig so far in the weeds and ask questions, but I mean, that's just something that's been weighing on my mind. And then if it's $150 for the year and I go in February to some event and then, darn it, they have something in November that I really wish I would have gone to, now I can't go. And if it's for a non-for-profit, maybe they really wanted me at that one. So yeah, I just kind of thinking ahead, and like I said, I'm sorry if I'm getting too much in the weeds, but I just don't know how we would ever know how much going to an event would cost.
If you look at page 3 of the Code of Ethics, under this exceptions to the gift provision, second paragraph, I think, is what the mayor's referring to, the last line in the second paragraph. Further, members may have food compensated when their presence is requested to attend a meeting or event.
So any event, even if it's a...
And that doesn't refer back to the nonprofit, educational, it's just a statement by itself.
I don't read it that way because the line before that talks about when you're requested at one of those events by an eligible organization, that they may compensate the member for food and admission to the event. And then there's a standalone sentence after that. But again, I'm bordering on practicing law, and I have someone who is much better educated on that.
And I'll say the intent was to avoid, I guess, the situation that Councilmember Tuttle mentions, which is showing up to, I guess, some type of get-together and, eating and socializing. Do you now have to report that? This is more, I think, meal, and in Topeka, going off the standards that the state has set, meals were never counted. You can report, you report if someone takes you out, there's a meal, but when they have I guess buffet style meals that folks are invited to, pretty much every night there's something. There was nothing in the ethics policy that tried to regulate that because frankly, there wasn't much undue influence being
Yeah, I think there's
done
another
there.
refinement here, and I've called it the slide up, and it's in your definitions, because this all pertains to a gift, right? And it's a good or service that is being conferred because the person has an interest in the city or an interest that may be affected by the performance or non-performance of the official. So if you have a friend that asks you to a Christmas reception, unless they're contracting with the city, they wouldn't meet the definition, in my mind, under gift, right? And so,
But what if they do have business with the city? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
You
So-
don't know it.
yeah. So then that comes back to, well, again.
and you
yeah.
may or may not know it. I mean, they may not now, but maybe they want to. And I'm totally enjoying the conversation, and I think that's what's going to make this better. But you know, it's just sometimes gray if you have folks that you've known for a long time and you've been active in the community. You know, it's hard to not know somebody who doesn't do business with the city in some way.
Yeah.
So.
The code of ethics is intended to help you maneuver through gray areas. We'll never eliminate all of them. It goes back to what Councilmember Blubaugh talked about.
But it's not just our maneuvering. This is for another council to maneuver through and decide whether
Right.
we're doing the right thing or not.
So it's up to you to determine specificity.
Like specifically the golf deal, really, I don't know that because, you know, we have the web.com, we have the chambers. I mean, it's stuff that your presence helps benefit the city. And I'm still having a hard time looking at the gray area in that. And can you accept a drink? If you do you need to have a drink in one hand and a calculator in the other, making sure you're keeping together, you know, what you need to have to be able to report?
So, and I want to kind of put this policy language in here because we need this. And good policy has really a person that you could reach out to of authority. In my mind, that's our legal staff. In my mind, it's the people who help us run the meetings where council members can send an email, hey, I'm invited to this event. It's a big social gathering. I've been going to it for 10 years, or it's this. Would this count as, what's your opinion if this would count as a gift or not? And then getting that feedback.
Mayor, if I could just interrupt, I apologize. Actually, the way this policy is set up, the chair of the Ethics Advisory Board and outside counsel would serve in that capacity. So that's who you would go to for an opinion. We specifically did not include the city attorney because the city attorney doesn't have a role in the enforcement. So, and that those two individuals would be responsible for the enforcement of this code. But the rest of the example is true. You have a question, you would talk to them, and you'd work that out before you made your decision.
So the council will have an outside legal representation for this, is that what you're saying?
You know, I'm saying that there'll be an outside ethics advisor that's outside counsel.
But we won't have any legal representation?
Well, that's a separate issue that we'll get into.
Yeah, so, and I guess that's a policy discussion, but having that person that you can reach out to, and every elected official, I think, has done this at the state level where, hey, Kansas ethics, does this count as that? Do I have to report this, and if so, how do I report it? And kind of getting any of the gray areas somewhat settled, because then you also have documentation that you acted in good faith. That's the other thing about this is it's the mechanism that would impose, I think, a sanction when you have folks who would the due process part of it. It kind of allows for that for that story to be told, for someone to actually show, hey, I under good faith, I thought this was okay, and I even went and got an opinion from the chairperson. And the policy choice is, do we want it to be, a legal staff, or do we want it to be the chair? I think that, that might be something we revisit in the future, but having that person to clear up any type of gray area is a common practice in this type of policy.
So in the scenario that I gave, where I'm invited to a holiday gathering, so I would email the chair of the ethics board and ask them if they thought it was appropriate for me to attend or not.
If you had a question,
if I had a
that's the
question.
way the policy's set up right now.
So, again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here a little bit, so I apologize for that. 'Cause in my mind, I hadn't formulated that would be the process before we came here today, so I'm not going to probably say this as varnished as I hope I would. But that's a community member who's appointed. You know, I understand when it's a campaign donation, we call the ethics committee in Topeka. That's their job, they're professional, they have, I mean, I worry not only, you know, will there be consistency and how will that person make that decision? And then that seems like a whole lot of pressure on a community member to have that role to decide what events or you know, we can go to. So I'm not saying it can't work, I'm just saying I think that I can see some potential issues with that in the future. So just FYI. And then Jennifer, this would be a question for you. Would that communication would be subject to Cora as well?
The question is communication between elected officials and the Ethics Advisory Chair. I believe that would be open, as an open record. It's not going to be attorney-client at that point.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I think that I share some of those concerns. I think we might want to have discussion on, do we want the point person to answer some of these questions to be just the appointed chairperson, or do we want to first go see if our legal department has an opinion, and our legal department might have the ability at that point where you're better off to forward this on to the chair. Just because employees do have, I think we can, more of an obligation to respond to emails faster, and there might be some adjustments you might want to make as far as that. But the point is that we want a place where if there's any type of gray area or anything could be interpreted one way or another, we want, because we might run into situations where there are really two sides to the story. Like, really in good faith, someone does something and then gets called out for it later, and you know, having that ability to have somewhat of a third-party judgment on it before it's a problem is a really important part of this type of policy.
Is the ethics advisory chairman, are they allowed to have a friendship or relationship with the council member or the mayor? Because shouldn't that make sure we have a divisible line there? Otherwise, it would, as a mayor's appointee, it would give power to the mayor that the mayor does not have under our current government.
Kind of. The actual language says the person will be appointed, vetted, and confirmed, which is a above standard of our normal appointment process, where so far the mayor's appointments are appointed and confirmed. It would be the responsibility of the council to vet any potential appointments.
I would just think, you know, it would give the mayor a power he doesn't have today, because why wouldn't every council member have their own chairman and their own committee? My feeling is that this should be outside of the city. This should be the district attorney, the county, someone else doing it. I think, you know, just like a police investigation, we shouldn't be doing it internally. I'd say the same thing here. This needs to be completely outside of our court for judgment.
I would argue that the mayor does currently have the power and the ability to make appointments to people who chair committees.
We all do, yeah.
Exactly, and so does the mayor. So to, I guess, reference our current form of government and say that the mayor doesn't have the appointment to, or the power as the only at-large elected to appoint the head of a committee or a council, it's just inaccurate. Like, I get, you can make the argument we need it completely outside of the city committee to investigate, and some ethics policies have gone that way, where everything will have to have like a out-of-city law firm to investigate, you know, in this case, I don't know, internet bullying. We just blow up the financial note at that point. And I think the policy, we want this to be something that is impartial, a due process that is impartial, but also strike that balance where we have folks who don't really have a vested interest in the outcome, but also know roughly what city procedure is. And that's why when we get to the slide about what is the creation of the board, that I think is very important because they struck that balance. Everyone who would be on this board at one point or another was confirmed by the city council for a different board. They have all signed and taken an oath of office, a oath to uphold the Constitution, and they are people, because of their service on these other boards, who actually understand city procedure and what happens here and understand our form of government. So I think we struck that balance pretty well, and I'm sure the manager's going to get to that in his future presentation of this.
It's actually the next slide, Mayor, but I don't want to advance to that slide until we have addressed the statement of policy, because there are a lot of items there.
So-
And I want to make sure you're all comfortable with those.
So couldn't the mayor potentially have a benefit in this, especially during campaigns and,
Only if you weren't doing your job. If you
pardon me,
weren't-
I can't hear you.
Only if you and the council weren't doing your job in that policy, which
How
is
about
also
yourself,
to-
Mayor? I mean, we're all peers.
I'm going to remind the council member of decorum in
This is a
section,
workshop,
in
right?
section 2.04.290 to show the utmost courtesy to each other while we discuss in any meeting. So that includes not making follow-up statements, interrupting each other, or making accusations to each other. Now, to your question, the way this is written is, could an appointment, I guess, favor one member over the other? Maybe if that appointment was done in a way that it just superseded the vetting process and confirmation of the council, then maybe. However, that, I guess, irrational fear is completely eliminated in the randomized selection of the board, which is a unique policy in which the board will be different every single time it's called to order, which means that there is no way that, given this pool, that one district or one, the mayor or one council member, there's really no way, unless it's random chance, that someone could actually stuff this committee with people who, I guess, are sympathetic to one member over another.
And Mr. Manager, I'm not so much worried about the board. I think that's, the way that we have it set up seems interesting, and looking forward to that discussion as well. I think it's the chair, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just going to kind of say this out loud, and I think I know, but also so the community members who may not have this in front of them know. The mayor would present to us someone who would serve as the chair, and then we would, it says, vet them and approve them. So if it was someone that we as council, as an entity, didn't feel should be in that role for whatever reason, we could vote for that not to happen, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's also, if you go further, there are attributes that are preferred in a candidate.
Yeah.
That they have a body of knowledge that would help in terms of being able to move forward with the code of ethics.
And, the only, again, I think it's going to be a heavy burden for whoever that person is. So I'm sure we'll select someone who's incredibly qualified and hopefully has some background in this. But, I worry a little bit about even consistency. Like, what if I, say, hey, I'm a little concerned. Can I go to this event? And they tell me no, but then they tell the vice mayor yes. So it might be nice to have kind of a like, what is, and if it's in here and I haven't thoroughly encapsulated it, because some of this, like I said, is just coming to me for the first time now that we're having the discussion. But, what if we have an angst with that chair? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so-
don't know, yeah, it wasn't contemplated there would be a removal before the end of the 2-year term.
Or like, what's our process? So again, I'm just going to use this as an example, and it's probably not the finest example I could come up with, but what if I say, there's this holiday event, and in full disclosure, I know this person and they've done business with the city, but we've been friends, and they tell me no, but they tell the mayor, and I'm just going to pick on you because of proximity, the vice mayor, yes. Who do I go to say, I don't think that's fair?
I mean, you could,
I mean, I think that's a legitimate question.
Well, you know, the non-legal answer is they are enforcing your code of ethics. And so if we have a reporting requirement of rulings that are given by the chair, that's your transparency, right? Which would allow you to call out, or for you, even before an annual review, to say, wait a minute, we're seeing interpretations that we believe go beyond what we intended as the council. But right now, you don't, I mean, that person is going to issue that opinion, right? And it's advisory in nature.
Yeah, that's true. It is advisory, right?
Right.
We need to point that out. So if they told me I didn't go, I still could potentially go if I felt that they weren't accurate. Because otherwise, I think that's where Councilmember Blubaugh, and I don't want to speak for him in any capacity, is saying that there could be some potential bias.
Right.
And Councilmember Blubaugh, am I correct in that? Is that kind of what your concern is? So, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
And again, it might get to the point where we would want House counsel to be able to make these decisions so that we had a more consistent, I guess, ruling by the same person. Because, I mean, there's a point where if I appoint and you all vet and then confirm one person whose perspective of ethics is one way, and then, you know, a couple years later you get a different mayor, they appoint someone else, and their perspective is a different way, you know, I guess there could be a conflict on if Councilmember Tuttle gets to go to her holiday party or not. So we could have that first round go through legal and then have if legal is uncomfortable making a decision, have them kick it or punt it to the ethics chair. I think that's smart, but also, like, I think that if we get too too deep into the weeds, you know, there's a lot of speculation being thrown around here for an otherwise, like, really broad, good policy where, you know, well, what if the same standards of making a decision weren't held over to another person because of undue favoritism? Like that, yeah, I guess in theory that type of stuff could happen. I just don't know how common that is, because that also would make news. That also would, you know, I don't think the person who wants to volunteer to be appointed for this chair position would be interested in causing, I guess, waves and doing a bad job. So there's a lot to think of. In Topeka, we have a thing called lawyering something to death, where people don't like the policy. They go in and they pick one word, shall instead of may, let's say, and they get so far down a rabbit hole that they beat the thing to death based off this one sentence, and they wind up sending the policy back to committee, and then that policy never comes back again. So, like, I don't want, I guess, perfect to be the enemy of good, especially during a workshop where we're not passing this today. We're pointing out stuff that we might think needs to be clarified, but there's nothing that's going to be able to clarify a hypothetical situation when you actually, you know, I guess, we're able to appoint and get past, like, an evil person who has an agenda as board chair. So, I mean, we can only do our best.
I'd like to, go ahead.
So I like where you're going with that, Mayor, because in speaking with the county commissioners, the secretary, and we're talking about the election commissioner right now, and they want to make sure they get an unbiased person in there. So the Secretary of State has told the county commission that applicants for an election commissioner cannot have a history of political activism. So that's pretty easy to do a social media search and find out whether that's the case. I would think that would be something we'd want our chairman not to have a history of political activism, someone that's neutral and can be unbiased.
And this is what, I guess, worries me about a cyberbullying amendment is posting an opinion on social media is well within someone's First Amendment rights, and I would say that is different than political activism. Now, political activism is one thing. An activist is an actual defined, I think, defined activity. But, you know, again, I think that some of it's subjective, and quite frankly, some of the positions we actually advertise here at the city, we have political activity or political experience there as a trait in which we wished to see in a candidate who applies for that. And that's actually included in the previous assistants to the council and mayor definitions that we've had going back last decade. So, I guess I worry about really the interpretations where I could view something as just a First Amendment expression, someone else could view it as political activism, and thus, does that now disqualify that person? Do we really want someone in here also who has no opinions on any policy that, might fall into, I guess, a political discussion? I just worry about that gray area and trying to make a hard policy to affect it. We just might have to trust the appointment process as we do for every other board that we have, where we don't like the appointee, we vote no.
So for this, I had a few things, some on that conversation and some to your question, Bob. So I don't personally feel comfortable with a yearly report because I may not remember that. Is there a way to change that to, if I have 4 coffees or, a couple lunches, that's a monthly submission to this, either the board or our legal counsel? That way, there's a notification like, hey, you're at $135 so far with this person. That way I can't do that. I think that for me would be better because we might get to December and then I look back and oh man, I went over 150 and I don't want to get into that type of point.
So copies wouldn't count for this. Because
I'm just saying, whatever it is, I would like to be able to report on a regular basis, and then that way I'll have some way to keep track of where I'm at. That way I won't go over the 150 and be in violation.
So one of the original drafts were looking to link this to the same reporting period as campaign finance. Because campaign finance rolls around and we all got to get our reports together. This would be one more report to add on top of that. Also, campaign finance reports were done, the timing was done somewhere for a reason. So you could see before, I guess, an election who was influencing, because political donations are actually political activism. They fall into that category as well. Who was influencing who when it came to elections. So I think originally that was my thought, was let's put this together next to, I guess, the campaign finance report, because we're doing reports anyways, and it's easier to be reminded of that. And then it was changed later to a year, I think out of ease, but I would be in support of doing it more often. If you align it with campaign finance reports, and I guess I'm putting it out there for discussion, then we all get letters, remind us campaign finance report. This would just kind of be one of those other, like tax season, right, where you kind of get all your paperwork done at once. Like this would be one of those times.
Yeah. I'm fine with that. Maybe just a broader discussion on the regularity of it. And then to the conversation earlier, I think it was Councilmember Tuttle, I would prefer we have maybe 2 sets of eyes. So if there was something I wanted to do or go to, that I could ask our legal counsel and get an opinion, yay or nay. And then if the advisory board chair gives me a yay or nay, there's 2 things I can reference at that point. Or let's say I got a yay from our legal counsel that interpreted what I was doing was within the code, and then I show up, or the advisory board then says that it was a violation. I have some form of comfort saying that I had a legal opinion saying that I could or could not. That way there's 2 sets for me.
If I can just jump in on that, I don't think there's anything in this policy that can or should prohibit you seeking legal advice or legal counsel from the city attorney or the law department at any time. I think you're free to have that conversation, and there's an attorney-client relationship there on any matter that is of the city.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just saying that for I'll do that anyway. But for, someone new to the council, we're about to appoint a new council member at some point. If they're not thinking about that, at least have it in writing that, you can get your legal opinion personally with our city attorney as well as with the advisory board. And then my last item, just listening to the concerns about the nomination process. If we follow the same way we do it now, where even with this new board, the mayor will have more appointment opportunities than the council, maybe in this situation, so that we can, as the mayor said, do our jobs, maybe a nomination happens one week and a confirmation happens the next week. And that gives us a chance to vet
Yeah.
and go through it, and then by that next meeting, we'd be able to say yay or nay. And it would be unique to that because this is a unique position and board.
So there's a separation? I can't quite hear you,
Yeah,
Councilmember Johnson,
Oh,
you're
sorry.
not in the microphone.
Yeah, I shouldn't have sat back. So if the mayor was to nominate an advisory board chair, let's say today, if this was a regular meeting, then we wouldn't confirm it today. We now know the name of this individual, whatever vetting process we have, what happened for a week, and then the next Tuesday, the
Yeah.
council would say yes to that person or no to that person. But that gives us a week to vet them out fully. If there's a social media search, whatever that might be, but just a week. And this would be a unique appointment process for this board.
I think that's a really good point, and I appreciate you being such a good thinker, because the word vet, I was kind of hung up on. And, you know, when appointments are made before us, we don't get to do that. So thank you for being a good thinker. I would really like to encourage that to be added.
Yeah, and I think it's important, again, like Councilmember Bluebell's pointed out, like, we're setting a policy now, but future councils will operate under this policy. And so I think we need to set a good example of vetting, because we don't do that for other appointments. We don't really vet each other's appointments. It's kind of our culture to say, okay, yeah, you think this is a good appointee, we'll vote yes. And so I think we're going to have to set a good example of that in terms of what does that vetting mean for this particular board chair, because we want someone, impartiality is really important, right, in this particular case. I think, like Councilmember Blueboss said earlier, should they be a friend of the mayor or a council member? I don't think so. Should they be someone who's out on the internet taking shots at council members? I don't see how they can be impartial if that's the case. And so I think that vetting becomes really, really important for us. I just think it does.
So we are also having, this is a partisan board up here. We also need something in place so that if a mayor who's from the minority of political ideology makes an appointment and actually the council keeps, I guess, rejecting the appointment, we can still have a way to get someone to run a meeting. Because technically this could be, you know, a mayor makes an appointment, whether it's me or the old mayor, depending on, I guess, the views of the body up here, they could technically keep voting down the appointment. And then we never have a chair, then what happens to this policy? You know, did we just then veto the policy because we found stuff that a potential appointment might have done on the internet? We just run into the problem that I think the governor is having right now with trying to fill vacancies with the courts, where, you know, for reasons people discover her appointments keep getting shot down. Like, in that case, what do? Should we have something in this policy where someone else would act as a chair, you know, if the appointment continues to get shut down, and would that chair maybe be selected as one of the random selections in one of these boards? I'm not sure.
The past practice of the council would pertain to every chair except for the first, right? So the direction we've always received is someone stays in the office until they're replaced. Even if their term is expired, it's considered extended until a new person comes in. That doesn't address an impasse on the first chair.
But it also, though, like, if the previous mayor made an appointment and then the next mayor makes a different appointment and they keep shooting down the next mayor's appointment, then the previous person is pretty much de facto reappointed.
All I said is that's the past
Right.
practice of the council.
And I just wanted to point out something, and just, I think it's important for the community to hear this clarification, is that we are a nonpartisan
Thank you.
body. And I think all of us come to the table with wanting to do what's best for the city of Wichita. I had someone in the community recently say to me, they have no idea what my political affiliation was, and I said, that's just the way I think it should be. So we are indeed nonpartisan, and I think the process will work of an appointment being made, vetting, and then coming back.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Then why are we
And I
talking about
complete-
political activism? Like, why does that matter then? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. I think it's important we're factual with the public and let them know we are not a partisan board. We're a nonpartisan board. I want to get off onto something else. I don't think that we've quite addressed is how is PACs affected by this, the influence of PACs, and how's a PAC that's ran by a spouse, how do we deal with the influence on that and gifts? And
It's not. That's campaign finance, which earlier in this discussion, we've already discussed as a completely different set of policy. This is about regulating council members' behaviors so that we can bring the same level of ethics that all of our peer cities have. This isn't about campaign finance, which falls under Kansas ethics. PACs are regulated under campaign ethics reform, statutes at the state level. This is silent on campaigning.
Okay, I was asking staff, but thank you, Mayor, for chiming in. But I do want to know, PACs, there's an influence there. There's obviously an influence there. People are donating. How do we handle the PACs specifically? How do we handle any money that's happening there, transferring there? And whenever one of our spouse is running a PAC, I think that's important that we need to be able to identify the influence that's happening there.
Right, but this policy is silent to that. So I get you're trying to tag in staff, but as a chair and a person who's in charge of this committee, I'm telling you what you're deviating off into is not germane to the topic. And it's my job to maintain order. So if the staff would just confirm yes or no if this affects campaign finance, that would be appreciated.
Councilmember Jennifer Magana, City Attorney, you're right to raise the question. I think this could be clarified in the policy. This draft wouldn't address that square on, and I think it is a subject for further discussion to make sure of what the intent of this council is in adopting a policy.
I'd like to hear from my colleagues to see if they agree
Yeah,
that we need to add PACs and influence of PACs to this.
I personally think this goes back to the separation of campaign finance and ethics, and we need to be very clear that those are two different things. And so, in my mind, a PAC, if they are doing these things that are in this avoid the appearance of improper influence, in other words, if they are influencing a council member or the mayor in the way that's set up in this policy, that you would have to record those and report those. That's how I'm seeing it. But the PAC itself is separate. I'm probably not articulating this quite exactly right. Maybe you can help manager.
So we're going to need to set up an entire meeting then on what PACs are.
Okay, so I had a question of the manager. Sorry, excuse me.
The chair recognizes the manager, but I do want to point out as a point of information that a political action committee cannot work with a candidate. They are separated by statute. So when we talk about influence, a political action committee cannot have direct influence by working directly with a candidate. So, and I insert this during the discussion, and again, I think we got to have now probably a hearing or a workshop on what political action committees are in campaign finance. Maybe we can get someone from Topeka to come teach us about this. Because the discussion here is lacking the context of what a political action committee's abilities are, and I think the finer details of campaign finance. But go ahead, Mr. Manager.
I think it depends on what you put in as a preface to the policy, which goes back to your original point, right?
Right.
In terms of the definition of donor, it's an individual business organization that gives or presents an official with something of value. The gift is conferred from someone that has an interest in the city or an interest that may be affected. So on its face value, a donor to a campaign, a PAC, could be in that if you don't exclude them with that statement up front. But then there's more in terms of the statement of policy.
Before we move on to the Ethics Advisory Board, I want to just clarify something that was the conversation about coffees and all of this. I think that when Vice Mayor Johnson said, someone takes me to coffee, I need to count those, and I think I heard the mayor say coffees don't count?
Right.
Okay, so I'm confused because where does it say that?
I think page 3.
Pardon me?
page 3.
So it says,
Exception, under the title, Exception to the Gift Provision.
And where does it
it's the
say?
last sentence of the
Further,
second
quote,
paragraph.
further, members may have food compensated when their presence is requested to attend a meeting or event.
Oh, so that means I understood that was a standalone statement, but that means even if I'm out with a business person in the community and
They buy you coffee.
I have coffee or I have lunch and they pay for it, that's excluded?
That should be. I don't think a coffee or a lunch anyone would assume is going to, switch someone's, unduly influence someone when it comes to an opinion or a vote. It's not the coffee that's doing it.
Mayor, I'm having trouble hearing you
Sorry,
again.
I
Thank
don't
you.
think anyone would assume that a $5 coffee or a sandwich is going to have an undue influence on someone's vote. So that was the purpose of this.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought that's what we were doing. I thought
I
we were
did
having
too.
log lunches and stuff to make sure we didn't get over the $150.
It's not, and I'm glad that we're pointing out the language in the bill. According to page 3, and this has been discussed multiple times, something such as a coffee or a sandwich or a t-shirt or something that's obviously, in most cases, not going to, I think, make an elected official make bad decisions or votes, to unduly influence the vote of an official. We try to draw that line because we want to be purposeful with this, all right? If someone takes you on a golf vacation to Florida and lets you stay on a private jet and lets you stay in their Orlando mansion, that is undue influence. If someone takes you out for coffee or lunch, that doesn't have that same level of influence. And that's the point of being, not just going through the motions so we can all just yell how ethical we are. It's to actually, I guess, interrupt that line of undue influence. So campaign donations, that type of stuff, that's highly regulated. What's not regulated, and then Topeka, gifts are highly regulated. But even Topeka, and what our state officials go through, they recognize that a sandwich or a coffee isn't something that we gotta, as I think the council member put it, drink coffee in one hand, have a calculator in the next. That's not the undue influence. The undue influence is the unreported gifts. And by having a cap on the amount of gifts that can be given, excluding a Starbucks, addresses that.
So maybe it would help then, because I didn't read that this way. I understand what you're saying, Mayor, and I appreciate that. So rather than, I hate to wordsmith, but somewhere in there we should say undue influence, because some of the things I've heard from the community would indicate to me that they might think that lunch was included in this and we ought to keep track of it. So I'm just trying, again, workshop, I'm trying to get feedback from other council members so we can think about that. Another question I have, so Vice Mayor Johnson suggested that we do a monthly accounting, and then Mayor, I couldn't understand what you were suggesting, that you wanted to keep this in alignment with the campaign finance report. And I don't know, from my perspective, these are two different things. I do my campaign finance reporting totally separate from anything I do on council. And
We can do it monthly. I mean, I was trying, your amendment to the original draft to make this yearly, which you put in a few months ago, that was one thought, and then Vice Mayor's thought was do this monthly. I thought if we bring it back to do it as a cycle, that would be the in-between. Because my understanding was the argument for your original amendment to change this to yearly was you didn't want to have to do these too much, or it could be a burden. So I was trying to find a medium with that. I can go monthly.
sorry, I don't
too.
recall that conversation with you. Did I have that conversation with you?
The manager did when I asked why we were changing that to a yearly instead of the original draft was, I think, the concern of the extra work it took. So I'm open to doing monthly. I'm open to doing quarterly. I think it's just I agree with the Vice Mayor that having more transparency, particularly with gifts is important because we're the only ones who are regulating that through this policy. We don't have a layer of regulation coming from the state. And if we followed the state's intent, then yeah, it would be, or I guess the state's precedence, it would be to do it in a cycle such as campaign finance.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I was just trying to understand. I couldn't understand what you said, so I was just trying to understand what the suggestion was.
So I know the mayor said we've been told this stuff 2 and 3 times, but I think a majority of us still aren't understanding, because if lunches and coffees aren't here, what are we going to be reporting every month? I mean, I've been on the council 8 years now. A T-shirt, a box of nuts. I can fill out a bunch of zeros every month. I don't know what we're going to be reporting.
I was about to say that. That's the defense of a year. If you think about it, I mean, just in terms of knowing all of you and past practice, I don't know that you get a lot that you'd have to say, oh, shoot, I went over my 150 because I lost track of it. There just aren't that many opportunities. There aren't, or that many gifts that I think any of you receive. I think it's more the lunches and beverages that we were talking about, which are exempted. But it's up to you. I mean, it's your accounting work that you've got to do.
Well, and also keep in mind, guys, we came into this with the consensus that we wanted one of the strongest policies in the country, if not the Midwest. If it's not a problem because no one is accepting gifts, then why not have a cap on gifts that's consistent with the state level policy that every other elected official at the state level follows? That's the point. Like, I'm glad everyone here wouldn't accept football game tickets and to be taken to a football game by people who want to do business with the city. But not everyone, I think, would look towards that and see that as a unethical act. And let's make sure that if that situation was to come up, we have a way for those people to report it.
And Mr. Manager, if this is in here, I'm sorry, I'm kind of I'm getting lost, and this may be too far in the weeds, but for the reporting, just because we're on it and the question's on my mind, and other folks may have the same question, I don't accept gifts. I don't let anybody buy me any food, beverage, anything. So are you still required to report and it just be all zeros? I thought of that when Councilmember Bluebaugh said it. I mean, and I'm fine with that, but I wouldn't, because I don't accept anything. I mean, I don't. Then as far as food, beverage, gifts, if I don't turn in a report because I don't have anything, is there angst? Is it a report every month, quarter, year, no matter what, or is it just if you have something?
So the point would be similar to your campaign report. If you've raised no money at all, nothing's changed, you just submit zeros. Okay. If you had a substantial interest form that really nothing changed. My understanding is you and another council member are file these forms more consistently than the rest of us, which is a really good thing. I'm sure that if nothing's really changed on it, it's the same. You just would forward it. It's more, and again, like I don't know how much more to stress this. I feel like we've been talking about food and coffees and stuff for the last hour, and this policy purposely excludes those so that we wouldn't, I think, be talking about the concerns we have right now. So you would be reporting, I think that it would be rare to report that you received a gift over $150 because, as the manager pointed out, we normally don't get gifts like that. But in such a situation where you did get a gift over $50, then this would give an opportunity to report that.
So on the mayor's example of a football game or a sporting event, you go to something like that, and the person's not doing business with the city. If they ever chose to do business with the city, you recuse yourself from the vote. Did you need to report anything?
No, because the person who gives the gift would have to have the intention of doing business with the city, I believe.
They'd have to do what?
They have the intention of doing business with the city. So if my mom came out here and took me to, I don't know, a game, I don't have to report that my mom took me to that game because she has no interest in doing business with the city.
I think his examples, it's a timing issue, and
What if she decided to?
I hadn't decided, so if somebody takes him to a game and has never done business with the city, but they bid on a contract 6 months later, and does the council member have to recuse themselves and also report that gift, even though at the time they gave the gift, they weren't doing business with the city?
The earlier policy, I think, talks about that, where the undue influence, where like, did that game influence you? Was that game a lobbying expense? You know, was that game something that was a precursor to them doing business with the city? I mean, that's the point of this, where if like let's say they took you to a game and you said, you know, hey, we're trying to diversify the contracts and the people who do business with the city. I hope you guys look into it sometimes. It's kind of a general statement. You're bragging about how you want the city to have the best people bidding, and then this person somehow does. I mean, disclosing that, I think, would be smart, but the reality is, like, is that an ethical violation? I think it's the context. Like, I think that we're trying to set up the parameters, but in that situation, I think there's a yes and no. It really just depends on if that was an act to create undue influence.
I want to get back on the PAC deal again, specifically about a PAC that's ran by someone that lives in your household, because Political Action Committee is formed out there to push change and move change. So how do we separate ourselves from that and make sure that we're not swaying power or swaying influence one way or another? Sorry, Mayor, I'm still speaking.
Go ahead.
But how do we ensure that we're being transparent with the public and letting them know this person's putting dollars in there, they're asking for that? How do we make sure that the public knows that you're not buying your way into influence?
Let's just go ahead and answer this head on, because I think that this is a silly charade game that we're doing with staff. My inauguration event was done as a big party, all right, like a year ago. We had a lot of people who helped us win an election. We didn't have the same money we had, so we had to really rely on volunteers. We wanted to do something special for those volunteers. We reached out to the Kansas Ethics Commission and said, hey, if we have this event, we also can't pay for it out of pocket. We're going to accept donations, and what's the best way to do this? And the reality was, if we wanted to be transparent, the only vehicle to do that was through a political action committee that my wife currently chairs. And the reason why is because if we did it through an LLC, if we did it through a non-entity, there's no way to report that. So every victory party that anyone has ever held that raised money to help offset the expenses, unless they gave back that other money, or unless the money was all theirs, was all done without disclosure and without transparency. So the reason why a political action committee, and really what was going on up here, is a political action committee allowed us to take everyone who gave us a donation for that event so that we could pay for the event and store it into an account which has 100% accountability, and then an ethics board on top of it, something that we're trying to get to in this policy but can't, that would actually regulate how that money is being spent. And it has a barrier in which the language in the law, it would be unlawful to actually have a PAC work with a candidate for the promotion or defeat of another candidate. So it is legally set up, and by having my wife, who is the treasurer of my campaign and the treasurer of the PAC, it actually precludes me by law from utilizing that PAC for my own advantage. So if you understand the law of this, it is not only the only transparent way we could have done it, but the way to neutralize that money so that it couldn't actually be used for my reelection. Because my wife is an agent of my campaign as my treasurer, and also of this. So it sounds, I guess, if you don't understand what the PAC is and what the laws are or how this works, it sounds like, oh, what are we going to do to make sure that political action committees don't have influence? The reality is political action committees are actually regulated. What's not regulated are LLCs. We have, in this last election, situations where LLCs actually have no regulation, can bankroll campaigns, and there's no way they're outside of the ethics, the ethics policy. So if we want to actually attack, I guess, campaign finance law, which I'm happy to do, we shouldn't attack the already regulated system that's in place that is fully transparent and is in Canada statute. We should attack the Wild West system of having one person who owns 30 LLCs be able to bankroll an entire campaign, or an LLC that can be formed out of state using a method of legal loopholes so that they can attack candidates unlawfully who are running for office. That's where we should be talking about, not talking about, I guess, the First Amendment rights of an organization who has created a PAC, or talking about the one particular event where we wanted to be transparent in our formulation of a PAC so that we had a place to actually report those numbers.
Okay, Mayor, I was asking, I'm going to staff because I'm asking for legal guidance.
Yeah, maybe someone else's wife has a PAC.
Sorry, sir, you're interrupting me, sir. But since you've brought up the issue, why don't we address fire and police unions paid thousands for your inauguration? How can you say that that does not have an influence on you when you directly have a vote in their pay, their benefits?
I'm sorry, were you not endorsed by the fire or the police?
I can't hear you, sir.
Were you not endorsed by the fire or the police? Did you not have the endorsement of the firefighters or the police when you ran for office?
I did get a non-monetary.
Okay, and this is the problem, like, I don't know if I'm being clear. If a political action committee, such as the firefighters or the police, endorse a candidate, they can also give a contribution to that campaign, okay? Just like they do with you, just like PACs do with you, with everyone else up here, they can give a donation to that campaign, and because it's a political action committee, all of their donations, all their expenses, all their donors, everything is reported. And it's transparent, because that's what we want it. Now, a political action committee cannot work or coordinate with a candidate, okay? Like, that's against the law. So in your hypothetical scenario, that while this PAC over here has received a contribution from this organization, and now that is a conflict of interest on a candidate, that PAC cannot actually do more than make a donation to a candidate that is of the maximum limit. They can't be a slush fund for a campaign. It's not a super PAC. It's tough for me to explain this. Like, I think people think PACs, they think super PACs, right? But like, there's actually like a whole legal definition and then separations between state PACs and candidates. So you can't use a state PAC as a campaign account. They're different. They have to stay separated. So to your, concern that, if an entity gave money to a PAC, how does that influence a candidate? That influence is already based on values. It's not based on the contribution to a PAC, because a PAC, there's no pro quid pro there. Like, a PAC can't actually coordinate with the candidate for the defeat or election of a candidate. So it's different. I don't know if that helps, but I get what you're doing. So, go ahead, continue on.
No, I'm asking staff, I'm asking my colleagues if you want to have this for a discussion.
No, you're kind of distracting from what we've already discussed, as this is about campaign ethics reform, not about this is about governmental ethics reform, not about campaign finance reform. It was determined by staff early on in this that campaign finance reform is a different vehicle. It's the next chapter, of the ordinances. We can have that conversation, but right now, we have nothing to guide us ethically through really what has been a turbulent time. So that's why we're focusing right now today on actual ethics reform for elected officials.
Okay, I would like to discuss, do my colleagues feel like thousands of dollars from a PAC, from police and fire unions, could have an influence on the decisions we make as regards to police and fire benefits, pay, retirement? Do you guys feel like there could be an influence there?
I would like I mean, guys, we gotta really get back to, I don't know, we could have that discussion. I would love to have a discussion about campaign finance. I could call it an emergency meeting. We can have a discussion about that. There's nothing I love more than to talk about the loopholes in our campaign finance laws and how they can be exploited, not only in campaigns, but also to slander and unlawfully attack candidates. I have no problem having that conversation. Today, though, where we're at right now is if we're talking about a different section of law. That's where we're at. So like your question about a car, we're having conversations about trucks. Okay, so that's where we're at right now. Like, so we're talking about trucks, and you're saying, I really want to talk about how cars drive. Like, they're different
If this isn't
vehicles.
appropriate for an ethics retreat, I don't know, when is the right time? This is about ethics.
Could I ask
Please,
just a
someone else.
question that maybe would help? If we, and I don't think it's silly to bring up this question. I don't think it's silly, but I do have a question. If we put a statement in here, like we talked early on, something about that campaign finance is outside of this policy. I know that's not the wording, but some sort of wording that does that. Would that preclude PACs from having the ability through our ethics to influence mayor and council? Am I asking that in a way, or should I ask it another way?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to define it. I mean, if you're going to talk about, I would say that PACs and campaign donors would not then, with that phrase, or in the preamble,
preface, whatever.
Right, I would say then that will be dealt with in a separate document. If the council wants to talk about campaign influence like you would other donors, then you would tell us to go back and revise this to address that. But this right now doesn't address it and was not intended to, and so that's why your preamble would meet the intent of the document in front of you. But truly, you can do, you can go further.
We can do anything.
And as I said, I know people expect at some point to have a discussion about campaign donors.
Yeah, and I don't have the legal background in PACs. I don't have a political action committee. So I don't understand a lot about them. So I'm trying to figure out, could a PAC try to give a gift, gratuity, hospitality, or favors to one of us as we serve as a city council or mayor, city council member or mayor? I don't know. I mean, I know they could, but would that be legal?
No, not under this policy. They would be,
No, not legal by policy. I want to know if it's legal by state law or federal law. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I would just say, I would have to check with what the state finance law says. I think that is addressed. I just don't know. And I'm just
Okay.
not familiar with it because fortunately it's not an issue that we look
I
at.
can
Yeah,
address
it's
it
not.
because it's actually an issue I'm aware of. So PACs, political action committees, can only make contributions for furthering political, I guess, agendas. So, for example, the PAC that develops around fair funding for schools, let's say, they could give you up to $50 gift. It's like a pencil or something, or the Delta PAC, the Delta Dental PAC might be able to give you. They fall into the same gift limits as everyone else, but as far as their activities, their activities have to be, if they do an information campaign, their activities have to be, I guess, to further a cause.
So they could, so you're saying that they could they could potentially try to influence a council member or a mayor by giving gifts, gratuities, hospitality, or favors while we're serving in an office. Not as part of our campaign, but while we're serving as a council member or mayor.
Without this policy, yes. If we don't move forward on this policy, anyone, any entity at all can give us as many gifts, shower us for vacations, bring us cars. They can do all that right now. This policy would not exclude any tax entity or non-tax entity, but they still fall. So like an LLC can do that. under this policy, as long as it's a gift, falls in the gift limit, a PAC would be more restricted than an LLC would if they attempted to influence through the vehicle of gifts.
I do know that LLCs give to PACs, so I don't know how,
Right.
I don't want to get into
So
that.
the
but-
reason why LLCs give to PACs is to make it transparent. A PAC is the most transparent way to express First Amendment rights without having an actual candidate in the state of Kansas. So candidates can spend on campaigning and on issues. PACs can spend on campaigning and issues because it all falls under the transparency of the Kansas Ethics Committee. An LLC is supposed to give to a PAC instead of spending independently because ethically that actually allows you to know who's behind a issue, right? So if we're talking about the issue to make it so that dental assistants can't put caps on people's teeth, and then you have like the pro-dentist PAC, the LLC dentist can give to the PAC because they are for that issue or against that issue. If that LLC dentist goes outside or around and starts doing stuff on their own, there's no way to account for that, especially if they stay underneath through the Kansas ethics, especially if they stay underneath the maximum for gifts. So just to your point, right now, there is absolutely no bumpers up. There is absolutely nothing at all that restricts a gift to an elected official who serves in this building. This right here would put those bumpers up. So this right here would make it so you can't give a gift over $150 or $50 without being reported over $150 for the year.
So Councilmember Blueball, does that help? Because a PAC then, with this new policy, cannot they wouldn't be able to give more than $150.
Yeah, I think, again, I just wanted to
Yeah.
see how everybody felt about the direct contributions, we want to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah,
and
I
make
think
sure that
that's
everybody understands.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Not that they're, again, specifically, but just by them being an organization.
Just like any other organization.
Yeah,
They would
okay.
fall under, except, like, I gotta put this caveat out there, because as an academic, this bothers me if I don't make this distinction. Like, a PAC is more restricted with meeting that $150, or that whatever the gift limit is, much more restricted on what they can do than like an LLC would be. Like an LLC would, because the LLC doesn't have, there's no Kansas Ethics Commission going after LLCs. They would have to self-report, while a PAC is actually required to report.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
So when we get into campaign finance, I'd really like to have legal advice on this.
And there is a city ordinance. We do have one city ordinance just on the contribution per campaign, and it's a $500
Yeah.
campaign contribution. That's where the city ordinance speaks to elections and campaigns. It just also says, we must follow the state campaign finance act. We must file an additional copy with the city clerk, just to the city ordinance. That's what's addressed.
So Jennifer, I thought that there was an unlimited dollar amount that PACs could spend. Like if they want to do $1 million for the billboards, they can do them, correct?
That I'd have to check on. But under city ordinance, we have a $500 campaign donation limit for
Right,
candidates.
but-
I don't know.
You're the legal representation, but I
right.
have been told that
Right. I don't.
they could spend any amount of money because of freedom of speech and whatever other causes that are out there. So that's why I specifically want to address PACs, because there is a lot of power in the PACs. And during an ethics retreat, I think it's the perfect time to discuss the influence of PACs. Because it's we're talking about coffees, we're talking about gifts. Again, my time on the council, I haven't seen these gifts that are out there, but we're talking about a lot of hypothetical, but let's discuss what we are seeing in reality.
We're not seeing this in reality. Because no one's giving gifts from PACs, are they? Like I haven't
But
heard.
there is an influence in PACs.
Well, there's an influence in everything. So the influence on a candidate, though, comes through their donations to the campaign. Because the only thing you have control of legally when it comes to money is how your campaign is being spent. You can't legally call a PAC and say, hey, I want you spending money this way. You can't legally do that. So this ethics is to put us in the electeds, a frame in which the electeds will stay within to stay ethical. So if you kind of, so I guess the discussion about PACs, because we can't use PACs for our own election, we can't influence PACs. Could they influence us? Maybe. I think the NRA PAC has a lot of influence in Topeka. Will they have an influence on us? Well, I don't know. It would depend on their agenda. To be honest, I think that it would be, I had language in here that referred to people who worked for entities that had an actual political agenda. Okay, so if you worked for a business that also had a political PAC associated with the business, would that be undue influence? How do we talk about that? I think that would be a more appropriate discussion if you actually worked for a PAC, if you got paid from a PAC. Just the existence of a PAC, I think, or work for a company that feeds a PAC. Just the existence of a PAC, I'm not sure is any more influence than any other, I guess, advertisement. Or, so like I said, and I've been saying this, like it really gets us off to a different lane when we're talking about policy, though. Like I'll use my car and truck example again. Like they all are vehicles, and we get that, but they're two different vehicles that overlap. Their purpose overlaps. There's an ethical consideration to campaign finance, and we can have that conversation. I would love nothing more than to have that conversation. But I will say campaign finance right now is highly regulated, and it's regulated at the state level, as our legal has confirmed. We have no regulation right now at all at the behavior of electeds. And I think that we need to address this part first. Do you have any other?
I'm in favor of having that workshop after we get this policy solidified. Because I think that they work in tangent, but this is step one.
I would like to see it all addressed at the same time. It's up to me.
We're not going to address it all at the same time. We're going to move forward on this policy as we craft campaign ethics reform. But this right here is the second workshop in the second year that we've worked on this. And to say that we're going to start down like an entire larger policy and I guess hold this one hostage until that one's done, like we're just not going to do that. We need ethical policy today. We need ethical policy last year. We're going to get this one done, and I'm happy to work with campaign finance if anyone who wants to work with me on that. We're going to have to actually know what PACs are and have a good discussion about that, and an honest discussion, and we can have that conversation. But right now, I don't think that we should be trying to uphold the work of staff for the last year, since December 28th of last year, after the type of 15 months, going back 15 months we've had of unethical behavior. It's time that we work today to restore trust in this building. So I feel like we need to stay on track with this. Once it's done, we can go to the next one.
I just want to ask a point of clarification. You just said 15 months of unethical behavior during the past 15 months, and I'm not sure what we're referring to when you said that.
Well, it's in the context of trust with the public, and I'm pretty sure that
Well, just because we don't have a policy doesn't mean that there's unethical behavior happening. I'd just like to clarify that for the community. I'm all for this policy. I'm looking forward to continuing our robust discussion today and seeing it come to the bench. But just because we don't have a policy now that's as strong as we want it to be doesn't mean that unethical behavior is happening. So I just want to make sure that I make that clarification.
And just not just last 15 months, I'd like to know over the last 8 years that I've been on the council, the unethical behavior that's happened here and the accusations that you keep stating that. I'd really like to know what those are.
If there wasn't unethical behavior, then how would you justify your vote against a former council member to have him censored? Did you vote because it was unethical, or did you vote because you were just going with what everyone else is voting for?
Can you repeat your question, Mayor?
If we want to talk about examples of unethical behavior, and let's say we don't want to get into the eagle.com and actual stuff happening in the media over the last 15 months, which I think I was referencing, And your question is about, well, I just want to know one example of ethical behavior in the last 8 years. I just want to know, I guess it's a good opportunity for you to explain your vote against a former council member to censor him about, what, 2 months ago? Did you do that because you felt his behavior was unethical, or did you just vote that way for another reason?
And I appreciate that example. I was thinking about the current body that we have now, so I.
Well, and I just want to get to the council member, to my left's question here. When you asked me to point out an example, I think an example is a comment on a vote you recently took. So could you explain to folks why you would take that vote if you didn't think it was unethical behavior that you were censoring?
Okay,
What's the question? I didn't understand the question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Mayor.
I have a hard time hearing
Yeah.
with your mask on, Mayor. I really, it's just.
I'll ask this one last time. And if not, I'm happy to move forward with this because I think that we're now down a rabbit hole.
I just want to hear you.
Councilmember Bluebog asked for an example of the last 8 years of any type of unethical behavior, because he can't think of an example. And I just said, well, I believe over 2 months ago, you took a vote to censor a member of this body. And I thought that vote was for unethical behavior. When he voted yes to censor a member of this body for their behavior. So I just wanted, I guess, for clarification of his original question, if that was an example of unethical behavior that he actually voted yes on, could he tell us what that vote was about?
Where in this ethics document do we address any of those issues that former council member violated?
So wait, I'm gonna look it up for you, but are you saying that the former council member didn't violate an ethical policy or
No,
ethical
I'm asking you.
standards?
Point, sir.
How about A? Can you read off A? Do you know what A is? A on page 2.
Excuse me?
Can you look at page 2A? You've expressed to me that I'm not being loud enough and you haven't promised to hear me, so I want to make sure we can read it together. Statement of policy. Officials of the city of Wichita, Kansas shall, and the question I'm referring to is how would the vote to censor the last person to hold the council District 3, how would this policy stop what that person did? A, the very first line in our statement here of proper behavior says, be dedicated to the ideals of honor and integrity in all public and personal relationships. That lone line was violated and confirmed by your vote to censor that person.
I'm really surprised you want to discuss this, Mayor, when you have an active civil lawsuit against that individual that you could potentially be paid thousands of dollars for.
I'm going to discuss legal matters of a personal nature with you or anyone on this board. Next question. Do you still have the floor, or do you need more examples?
Go ahead.
Okay. Is there anything else on statement of policy?
Yeah, I'm still interested maybe in us looking at the food and beverage. And I only say that because of public perception. I just went back and read one of the articles in the Eagle, and I remember questions I received from some of my constituents about meetings I had and lunch meetings and who that was with. And although I was open to say, none of my lunches were more than $10, I think public perception-wise, there's the concern of maybe who you're meeting with, if things were purchased for you or if it was a lavish dinner, and then what comes up with city contract votes. So maybe not a decision today, and maybe more so just for those watching. I'm interested in hearing what the public has to say about that, because I heard a lot of concern about that, and maybe now that's not a concern, but just keep that open.
Before I get into the Ethics Advisory Board, and I know you've had a lot of discussion on that, let me summarize where I think we are right now. And I'm sorry, I did not say in the very front of this that during your retreat, you indicated that you wanted public input before you finalize this document, that you wanted engagement. So that's something that we need to talk about once you get another draft. How do we go about getting public input? Okay, so here's what I've got so far. The council wants this to be reviewed in a year. There needs to be a preamble that talks about, today at least, that this does not deal with campaign financing issues, and that will be dealt with in a separate document, or currently is dealt with by state law, or city and state law. And again, I'm just reading my notes. I know there's not consensus on that yet, so I want to make sure that we get through all of these, right? That there needs to be more work on the definition of friend. The relative has been amended at the very end so that it's any other family member living in the same household. I'm not sure there's consensus yet on the reporting interval, how often you would report. And also, is it required to report if you received $0 in value during whatever that interval is? A review on the exception for food, or a revisit of that. A 1-week delay between the mayor's appointment on the Ethics Advisory Board, and I'm kind of spilling over until the next item, between the mayor's appointment and the council confirmation. Some discussion about a prohibition similar to the county on a history of political activism, and no relationship with the mayor and council for that chair. Those are the comments that I have right now. Also that somewhere here that we indicate that the council has the right to ask the city attorney for an opinion, although that goes with the position right now, but I understand for future new council members, you wanted to do something. Those are my notes so far from where we are.
Good job.
Is that reflective of where we are?
Are we addressing council representation by an attorney?
We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, there's nothing that prohibits that.
I'm just stopping where we are. We haven't gotten there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when we go and look at this, though, I would really like an actual comparison to other ethics policies with this, because I don't want us to repeat some of the mistakes that might have been made, in the early stages of creating ethics policy at the city level. By being this late in the game, when it comes to creating an ethics policy for elected officials, we can benefit off of, I think, some of the examples of our sister cities. So I worry of unintended consequences with some of this stuff. So hopefully when we explore it more, we can do so through an academic lens, through a practice lens, to ensure that, because I think some of the what ifs have been addressed in other examples. And so I just want to make sure that, we're following the best practices as stated by, or set by both practice and academia when it comes to these.
I would agree with the mayor. I think we need to benchmark, see what other people have done, and definitely need to be able to roll this out to our dabs, roll this out to the public, and get the outside. Sorry, sir?
We're not gonna, so do
We're
we
not
need a
gonna what?
time frame on that?
You interrupted me, sir. What did you say? We're not going to go out to the public and talk about it?
We are out in the public, but we don't need an approval.
Bless you.
You okay?
I'm just surprised at your comments.
So this was not only put out in the public last week during a press conference, but I don't want this to be poison pilled. I don't want this to be slow rolled any more than it is. I understand that there are people who don't want any ethics here because they enjoy the current situation as it is and wants to do everything they can to slow this down some more, but we gotta have at least a date in place. We gotta have progress on this, particularly before we start rolling into the election cycle, where I think that if, when we don't want more undue influence or the perspective of that. So the idea that we're going to slow roll this down, I'm not in favor of slowing this down to a point after working on it for over a year that, would drag us out for another 6 months. Like, I'm hoping we can get it done before then. And as far as public comment goes, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've already had one workshop. Almost a year ago, we had a workshop. This is the second workshop. We had press conferences on this. I think that we've had quite a lot of engagement with this as well. So I do want to point that out.
To your point, you just said you've been working on it for a year. I think we need the public opinion on this. I think we need their influence. I think we need to make sure we're addressing everything. I think it's part of our democracy that we need to hear from individuals.
Let me take off my mask so you can hear me better. We had a press conference about this. Over almost a year ago, we had a workshop about this. We've had multiple back and forths with the public out of the, multiple reports through the media of unethical behavior, multiple contacts with folks about what they want as far as ethics and as far as change. And all I'm saying is if you want to now roll this out to the DAB board, if you personally need to start gaining more public comment, I think we can do that. I just want to make sure we're not slow rolling this, that we're not going to artificially slow this down to the point where, where it takes another year to get movement on a policy that literally every city we're comparable to already has. So that's my fear, is just let's make sure we're not slow rolling this in the assumption that we haven't had public policy on this, like that's an inaccurate assumption. Even if you associate public policy just as that follows a workshop, we've already even had a workshop on this.
I guess I'm just looking for consistency with how we would handle any other change in policy that we do with the council. We've had the discussion for a year. I think everybody on council is alert as to the rules. I don't think there's been any violation of this in the last 12 months. I don't think council members are going to go out and violate the rules that we have today. So I don't see anything wrong with going out to the public and hearing what their comments are. I don't think you're going to see any unethical behavior between now and then.
And I just want to point out we've been doing that for almost a year. Like, I just want to make it crystal clear that your comment about why would you be against this, I'm not. That's why I've been having this conversation, and the city's been having this conversation for over a year now. So let's make that crystal clear. If more time is needed, I also want to make it crystal clear that I would need to vote on that. That is not a consensus of the body. That is one member who would like to push this out even further at this point, unless we would like to vote on stopping this for another few months or whatnot.
Well, this is a workshop. I don't think we're voting, but I'd like to hear from my colleagues as to whether they think the public needs to chime in on this or not.
Or if the public has had enough chiming in on it, I think is a more accurate question.
I have a question to staff. Has the public seen this policy?
We just released this draft on Friday
Yeah, to the public.
From our office.
Okay, so they've not seen it before. We've not publicly released this before.
Last week's press conference, we released a condensed version of it
When was that, Mayor? I'm sorry, when?
Thursday. It was
Last
our
Thursday?
press conference.
Okay.
With all the media, all the local media was there, yes, to ask questions.
But just last week, right? Last Thursday, Bob?
Yeah.
Was the first time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the public's just seen it. I know you've been talking about ethics. I understand that, but I believe the public's just seen this policy last week.
I mean, sure, how long do they get to see the budget policy? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing we've done. What was that, a couple of weeks that they got?
Yeah, but we went to the DABs with the budget.
Yeah, they see that for months.
Yeah, they see that for months.
Yeah.
No, that's
It's not a 1 week.
So this has been going on for longer than months, but if I guess we get to Claycomb, or Councilmember Claycomb's, that, well, we just got the actual policy, the final draft. How long was the final draft of the budget presented before we actually voted on it? And I'm asking that just for reference, where I think we had a few weeks on that, so we could probably give this the same amount of time.
It was a 30 days, Mayor, from the time I introduced the actual document to the time you voted on it.
Okay, so the actual final full document was 30-day process, and that's the budget. That's literally everything we spend money on after taking months of building that document. I mean, I guess it's fair that we've spent, well, I've spent with staff over a year building this document. So, you know, getting back and forth with the media for weeks, I guess 30 days from now would be more than enough time. I mean, because this isn't nearly as considerable as the actual budget. So I think giving it 30 days from now, under the precedence, that's where we give our most important document to get public input on for the final say. That should be, I guess, enough, right?
I just want to make a comment that, and I don't have a time frame in mind. I haven't thought about clearly what was going to happen after this. I mean, I kind of assumed it would go to DABS and we get public input, but I wasn't clear. But just kind of FYI, when the budget was released, the final version, there was 30 days for input, but there was months of public input before that. We went to district advisory boards, we had the budget simulator, so that's kind of a normal process to really, I think we're beholden to our constituents and community members to get their input in a really robust way. So, you know, like I said, I don't know if it has to go to DAB. I don't know what the next process or next steps was going to be, but I do like the idea of getting as much, for transparency's sake, getting as much input as we can. And we have really smart community members who care about this process and want to be engaged and involved, and I hope we give them that opportunity.
So 30 days, and people can deliver it to their DABs. If for some reason they haven't talked about the topic of ethics between last year and now, then we could probably get that done. I'm comfortable with that. I'm just not comfortable not putting a date on it and dragging this out even further. I mean, we've all gotten feedback when it comes to gifts and when it comes to stuff. This isn't a new topic. This is a new program. So I think 30 days would be proper, unless Councilwoman Tuttle wants to suggest another amount of days.
Again, I don't think we're at a workshop. We're not setting timelines on things. You know, 30 days, I wouldn't even be able to get it to my DAB in time. So I hate to remind the mayor, but you are only one vote here on this council. I think this needs to be consensus. We need to discuss this stuff as a working body.
Councilmember Bluebog, why don't you suggest a time frame then, if not 30 days? I'm suggesting 30 days because our most intensive document, which is the budget of this entire city, it only takes 30 days to, once the final document is printed, to have people look it over and give feedback. So if 30 days isn't enough, then what would be the time frame you'd like to see?
I would just like to get it out in front of the public, have some discussions on it, get their input, and...
So how long would that take, though? You've been on this board longer than I have. You have more experience. You know, what would be a good time frame? Are we thinking 60 days?
Could I make a recommendation, Councilmember Blueball? I don't want to interrupt, but I think this is, now I think we're getting out of our lane. I think that's more of a staff function. Would you agree with that in some capacity, Bob? I mean, usually it's staff who gets it out and then makes sure it gets to the DABs and sets up the timeline for these things. I don't, if I'm wrong, please always correct me, but yeah.
If it's the council's desire, as I said, I'm just going to go back to the retreat. And the retreat was that you wanted a robust process for engagement. I could bring something back to you in a week on some ideas on how we can get the word out and get meaningful feedback. And at the same time, I can bring through the changes that you've agreed to or directed us to put in here. There's going to be a few openings where I'm going to need your feedback again. We'll circle back, maybe do a continued workshop at the end of a council meeting so that we don't drag us out till the end of, February. But I can bring something back to you next week regarding a suggested approach.
I think that makes the most sense than us trying to figure out the logistics here. And that's it's taking us a little bit out of the discussion of the actual, workshop. And for the folks watching, I think the logistics can be hammered out after this meeting. But I do like the fact that we're going to make sure that we're getting constituent feedback and being as transparent as possible in the process. So I appreciate that, Bob, and I appreciate you coming up with what you think is a reasonable timeline for us to follow.
Did you, though? So it was a week that we will get, I guess, proposed changes to the current document, and then we would need, if we're being consistent, 30 days after that for people who haven't been getting input on this topic since the last workshop to get input on this topic plus the document. And then we can likely have a vote to the end of next month, or maybe in March. Is that what we're looking at?
I don't know, Mayor. I can bring back a suggestion. It's up to you to determine whether that is the engagement process.
That's what I thought, but I mean, then it was just said that staff was the one who determines this, and unless I call an emergency meeting to have this an up and down vote, then I
It's
do
not a
want it to
public health issue.
be a group decision and with staff, so I'm trying to figure out what would be the proper, because in my mind, we've been working on this for almost a year, publicly and privately, considering we had a workshop on this, or is our second workshop. We had 2 workshops when it came to the budget. It feels important, like the budget was important. I was trying to use that as a reference, so.
Mayor, if you let me, I can put this under mayor and council items at the next agenda for next Tuesday. And that would allow you then to reflect on the changes that we thought we heard, and you have a change document. It'll identify issues that are still unresolved, and it will have a suggested timetable and approach to engagement. You're free to do whatever you want with that recommendation or thought.
You know, I think this is an important part of policy. We've got 1 council member absent today. We've got 1 seat that's not filled. I think District 3 needs to have a voice in this as well.
We're gonna move
So
on to the next
I
slide.
appreciate your metric and wanting to have a timeline, but this is very important, and I think we want to get it right.
We haven't even, speaking of public and engagement, we haven't even gotten to how the board's going to be developed. We haven't gotten to any of the actual concrete. All we've gotten, I think, is off topic about campaign finance and then about how we want to talk about this to the public. But the reality is, this is the public meeting, and we haven't even covered beyond the very first part, 1 part of 3 that go with, ethics reform. So if it's okay, can we get to how the board's created and the other actual details of this policy that staff's been working on for over a year?
Why don't we do that, and then we'll then have something at the end that will allow you to give me some more direction, if that's okay. So let me finish the presentation. Talking about the Ethics Advisory Board, I don't know that I need to visit this slide much because you've spent time talking about it. It's for a 2-year period, you would have an ethics advisory board chairperson. All other appointments, 6 members to a board, would only be in place when there has been a legitimate complaint filed. And those people would be selected at random from these 5 city boards and commissions. And I'm not going to spend time on the whole process and the exclusions or exceptions, depending on who the complaint has been filed against or anything like that. But it is detailed in the Code of Ethics. There are some limitations on someone being on the board. They need to be at least 18 years old, and that's because you've got youth members of some of the boards. There's a list of exclusions. Council members and their family or their partner or spouse can't be a member, nor the same for employees of the city or elected public officials or candidates for elected public office. Again, that's that ultimately the council decide if those are legitimate limitations. And then I just want to make clear here that the board has 2 primary functions. One is to prepare advisory opinions and guidelines for the Code of Ethics and the interpretation, and then also to formally review legitimate and perform investigative reviews of legitimate complaints to the Code of Ethics, or about violations of the Code of Ethics. So those are the 2 major responsibilities for this group. Here, if you go to the second paragraph on here, it says that the chair and the outside legal counsel will review every complaint that comes in to make sure that they're legitimate. And if it's determined that a complaint is frivolous or groundless on its face, then it will not go on into an investigative process. And then the next part says that the person who is the subject of a complaint, if it's determined to be legitimate, not frivolous or groundless, then they would have 7 days to submit a response to the complaint to be considered by the Ethics Advisory Board. And then the board would conduct its investigation, and its report at the end would be given to the city council, and it must include the 5 elements that are listed there in bullet points.
So again, Bob, who would make the determination on what is a legitimate complaint and what isn't?
The board member and outside counsel, the chair and outside counsel.
And my original concept of this was to utilize internal counsel as much as possible. Do we have a fiscal note that would show how much that, utilizing outside counsel to, give an opinion? Do we know how much that would cost roughly?
No, we've not put something together on that. Because I don't know if it'd be an hourly, it'd be on a retainer basis. I'm not even sure, who would be qualified to do this work, and we'd have to do more research on that. There was a concern, though, about the conflict for our staff to serve in this capacity. And that goes back to the issue that Councilmember Bluebob brought up on representation. And so I'll let the city attorney talk about that, because it probably is a good pause point since you asked that question.
Remember, to respond to your question, where you were asking about representation for individuals. It is not something the city would normally provide legal representation for as an individual in an individual action. The city provides representation to employees and officers under its duty under the Kansas Tort Claims Act to handle matters that arise in the course of a professional duty or official duty. But it would not be something, and I've not seen anything similar where the city would provide legal representation to an individual who is the subject of a complaint.
So the city would be allowed outside counsel?
The city is apparently, under the policy, talking about hiring outside counsel to advise the EAB. But for individual council members who would be the subject of a complaint, outside counsel would not be provided.
So we'll need to, so we'll hire outside counsel to make a prosecution against a council member, but if the council member comes under this, then we need to hire our own legal representation. Is that correct?
That's not addressed in the policy, but that's what my position would be. The city would not be in a position to provide legal counsel to someone who's the subject of an individual complaint.
Yeah, and also it's important to point out that we're talking like a fine. Like, we're not talking about jail time or that type of stuff. So
If I may address your mention of appeal time, there is the right probably under the state statute of an appeal of a finding this governing body to district court. It's not addressed in the policy, but it's due process that we need to discuss further, and that's something we haven't gotten to. But an individual who is found to have violated this and subject to a penalty might have the right, and probably does have the right, to an appeal to district court.
I don't think it's the fine that bothers me. It's more of the public humiliation, the public, this guy's, you're going to be tried in the media. They're making these accusations. Us that have other employment, you're going to have people, I'm not going to do business with him. He's corrupt. He's unethical. He's had charges brought against him. This is a lot larger than a $100 fine.
So, and I want to be clear with my statement. I'm not saying that people shouldn't have the option to have legal counsel and representation. I just want to, the question I think is, should taxpayers pay for that? And maybe we can go into because it's been brought up as somewhat of a guide and even confused as the same thing so far. Maybe we can go into how Kansas ethics, when they have a hearing against someone who's been accused of violating Kansas ethics reform, how does that process work for the defendant? I think that would be an interesting guide, because I think that there is
option for defense, but I don't think it's taxpayer funded. It just might be something worth bringing up as we continue this policy discussion.
Okay. We'll do a little more work on that and have some more discussion. And this is another issue that is treated differently in other cities. Councilmember Bluebod asked about what other cities have done, and we did look at a number of cities for many of these sections to see how we compared. So not all cities do this, but this one, this code would allow the Ethics Advisory Board to levy a fine of no less than $100 and up to $1,000. They'd also, if they found the complaint was valid, but they also have the ability as an alternative to require training for someone or to issue a public censure. And then if it's an appointed official, not an elected official, that person would not be fined, but they would either have training or they could be removed from their position. Again, there are numerous examples of different approaches on something like this.
And I just want to point out something that's not in here that I would like staff to look up. I would like something about language that would have the chair not destroy evidence so that that evidence can be forwarded to the DA if the DA chooses to do an ouster proceeding. Of course, so if any evidence is brought up to show that someone has been unethical, we don't want the chair to not be able to produce that evidence if the district attorney decides to take up that case under the oustering statute.
I'm going to pause here. This is.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. That's my last slide on the board, and I think there's a lot of issues here in terms of the board and enforcement. So
I think the number one issue I have right now is the chair. And I hope my colleagues chime in here because this chair we need to have no touch points with. It's got to be outside of everybody on the council.
I would say I think the process we've outlined kind of allows for that. Again, the mayor would make that nomination on one Tuesday, and then that next Tuesday we'd be able to say something that gives us time to figure out if there are any relationships that are too close or conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I just don't know another way we could do it because the chair for legitimacy has to be empowered by the body. All of the members would be empowered by the body who serve on different committees who would be pretty much that jury pool. I mean, the only other way would be the manager or someone appoints the chair, but that of course deters, I mean, that crosses that line where of the administrative branch of our government is separate from the policy branch. Like in this whole policy is to govern the ethical behavior of electeds, and it doesn't cross over. So I'd be open to another suggestion.
Does Mark Bennett have an ethics department within the district attorney's office? Is that a potential that we could, that way it's no one in the city, it's over at the county. If there is an ouster proceeding, it would be a dotted line connection to him anyway.
So one of my problems though, or I think something we got to think about is the idea that we would have another elected body to have, I guess, that authority over us, particularly a partisan elected. I mean, so, and getting back to the original discussion, or early on, we talked about experience in the legislature. The Senate doesn't appoint ethical boards in the House, for example, and vice versa. Like, even though they're the legislature, they're separate, and that's done on purpose to respect those boundaries. I mean, and there's politics if you start going that route. I don't know. I mean, if someone comes up with a better idea that's still within, I guess, our realm of governing, in our body of governing, I think it would be open to it. This seemed like the most fair way to do it, because again, it's literally like the majority of this board is, it's a jury selection, it's randomized, it can't possibly be any less tampered with than that.
What I'll tell you from our research, if I'm reading this right, unified government has a board or commission. Kansas City, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Colorado Springs do, as well as Fort Worth. Overland Park doesn't have a board. Instead, it hires an independent counsel to conduct the investigation and to make findings. And then Hayes kind of goes along a little bit towards what Councilmember Bluewell was talking about, actually turns its complaints over to the county sheriff, who conducts a confidential investigation. I've not seen that before, but that's bringing in an elected person from another jurisdiction. That's what our research has shown.
So,
And there are several cities that don't do anything, or some cities that don't do anything.
So, and I'm gonna go back to this. The rules, there's just a lot of ambiguity here. Ensure that the expenditures by the city are in interest of the city, for the betterment of the city, and only for appropriate city businesses. Bob, if I go back to your office and I think you're doing wasteful spending, then I could be unethical because I've violated our ethics policy because I didn't stop you from doing that. I mean, there's so much interpretation and not going out to the public with this and getting their influence. I just don't want to. I want to make sure we're doing this right.
So I also have some language I would like added about bullying. Right now, there is absolutely nothing that would prevent an elected official from bullying, harassing, attacking a member of our staff. Absolutely nothing that would stop a member of the city's staff to actually be bullied or worse. And we should add that to this. In my experience in the legislature, when reports of behavior that was unbecoming of an elected official arose, it showed that we had a hole in the legislature on ensuring the safety of staff and of folks who help us. And I want to make sure that we don't have that same type of loophole here. So if we're going to talk about, I guess, bullying, which apparently is already put in on this, I would definitely like something there so that a member can't pull a staffer into his office or her office, close the door and scream at them, or text message a staffer that they want a relationship with and put that person in a very uncomfortable spot.
I agree. I agree that we absolutely should be held to the highest standard of treating our staff well. You know, I always say there's 3,107 city staff because along with council and mayor, we are also staff. So we should be treating each other with respect, and I hope that we all are. I just wonder if that doesn't fall under A, to be dedicated to the ideals of honor and integrity in all public and personal relationships. I wonder if it's being redundant since that kind of seems to cover it, but I think that's a really interesting observation.
So and thanks for pointing that out. If I'm just talking about if we're going to talk about bullying or cyberbullying, this entire document is about keeping people within their own ethical boundaries, right? Like everything here is within our own personal control. When you start talking about my concern when it comes to subjective stuff, such as, does someone else feel attacked on the internet or something? We're going to open up, I guess, other concerns with that. That's fine. We can go down a roll, make adjustments. But if we are going to now talk about bullying, if we're going to be specific about this type of behavior, we have to protect staff. Because when it talks about ethics with honor and integrity, and then, we also have our decorum, which is, utmost courtesy to each other and to employees. If we're going to codify that language to protect, I guess, each other from feeling bullied by someone else, we also need to codify that language to protect our most vulnerable here, which are staff, people who cannot
Mayor, I wholeheartedly support that. Yeah, absolutely, that should be in here.
Thank you. If we can get some language, I think, drafted up about that, that I think would be great.
As well as each other.
I had two, I don't know if they're quite, well, one is a question, one is another clarification. So if there are, and I don't mean someone who thinks there really is some wrong going on, but if there's someone who just makes outrageous allegations, is there a consequence for a false report?
To the Ethics Advisory Board,
Yeah.
there is on whistleblowing, but in terms of Ethics Advisory Board, no, other than it would never see the light of day. It would be reviewed by the chair and by the outside counsel, and they would make a determination that it doesn't have any merit. If someone were to file numerous or several, complaints, there's not a process that, does anything other than just continue to reject the complaint.
Okay. And then on the fine, would that fine be paid for by the official or their campaign account?
I believe it says that you can't use campaign funds, but let me double check.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it says you cannot use campaign.
Yeah, or city funds, or you couldn't use like hired money or something. Like it's supposed to be personal. I think it actually uses the word personal funds.
At the bottom of page 4, second to the bottom, second paragraph to the bottom, it says officials must use personal funds to pay
Yes.
for all fines.
All
And
right.
cannot
I
use money
misunderstood.
allocated in the city of Wichita budget.
Thank you.
And we had issues with that in Topeka where an elected official would get a fine and then use their department's money to pay it off. And yes, we want to make sure that it was personal here.
So can I ask a follow-up? I just want to ask a follow-up on that. So that personal funds has a definition. I mean, that means that it has to come out of your own pocket, right? Like someone couldn't pay it for you.
That's the common understanding of it, and that's what
Okay.
I would interpret it to mean.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, how many ethics claims did you see in Topeka in your tenure?
So it's an interesting question, actually. In my tenure of 7 years, there was one ethical complaint that I think would fall under this, right? About regulating the behaviors of the electeds within the House. And I was actually appointed to that board, one of the 6 members who actually got to I guess, examine the validity of that complaint. So that was one. However, I will put out there that since, and I know these are different, but under the kind of blurred line that we created, there's also numerous campaign ethics issues that happen every year, some bigger than others that, it's happened while I was up there. And the one that was actually about decorum, to be quite honest, was actually about, a discussion that I think was taken as an argument and offended some members, and that was what led to the proceeding. So it wasn't a clear cut, like taking a bribe or anything along those lines. Like it wasn't like a clear cut issue. It was really interpretive, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of keep this policy more self-regulatory and less interpretive, right? Like, so the person who reads this, it's within their power to stay within the ethical framework instead of, I guess, anything that would limit behavior that in one person's mind is within the ethical framework, but in someone else's mind can be weaponized and used against them.
I guess, if, we're talking about $100,000 fine, but if we get to the point where a council member is to be eliminated from the council, I'm gonna go back to other discussions we've had. I believe the only people that should be able to unelect a council member are the people that elected him, and I would really like him or her, because I'd like to see it go back to those individuals.
And I'll just add that we don't have control over that. The state law has it so the DA can ouster someone for cause. So we would have to change state law if to eliminate oustering. This was very specific. Some of the policy we actually researched had a provision that allowed the council to remove someone. And because of our state law and our statute, where we already have that non-governmental or our government agency, that the DA that can come in and act in that way, we didn't need a removal clause in this. And also, we appoint our next members, which is different than some other cities. So the power to remove a member and the power to appoint other members, I thought, opened up the door in a what-ifs world of more shenanigans. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't, in this policy, allow or try to put in a ouster type language by the body, because we already had that in Kansas statute.
I don't want to take any power away from our voters. We're already a weak form of government. We have term limits. And I don't want to take away anything from those individuals that have voted us and give us the honor of representing the city.
Right, and let's make sure that we know that this doesn't do that. Every city that we're comparable to has a body of ethics that we expect people to maintain if they're going to represent the public. That even includes, if we were elected by the public and we refuse to take our oath of office, we refuse to uphold the Constitution of the United States, we can't take office, right? Even if the people elected us to do that, we then can't take office. So there are standards that are important to fair and free democracy that go beyond a direct election. And this is somewhat, a addition to that. Taking an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution is a value statement. That is saying, I will uphold this as an American, as an elected in a position of power. This is more seen as kind of the ethical boundaries that people expect you to be in when you are elected. And I'll just point out one other thing. Since we have term limits, we don't want anyone in a situation without any ethical boundaries to be elected, realize they're term limited, and then behave unethical because they feel they won't be accountable to the voters next time around. This will still hold people accountable while giving them due process, while giving them an opportunity to give their side in case they are unjustly, accused.
But we said this does not create an ouster for them.
No. So the current policy as it is does not create.
I think an easy thing. There's a lot of references in this, in the Ethics Advisory Board procedures that say things have to be done in writing. And I just want to make sure that in writing means email, whatever, because I could see, particularly like a board member that maybe is accused of something being out of town during that time. So I just want to make sure that in 5 days, they're on vacation. And so email or whatever goes into that.
It wouldn't be a bad idea to clarify that for the policy going forward.
So there's just several, so there's no question about what that is. There's just several places in there. Thanks.
I also think language consideration-wise, Councilmember Claycombe's suggestion about someone not being able to pay that for you, the fine, that be written as well. I know we all assume that, but that just be written.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
When I had asked if you had to pay the fine on your campaign, and the document said that you have to personally pay for it, but then Councilmember Claycomb kind of made the comment, you know, somebody can't pay that for you. That should be written, because you wouldn't know if I got fined $500 if somebody's like, here's $500 cash, and then I pay that. You think I did, so just writing it, again, just for more accountability.
And I agree, I just, keep in mind there'd be no way to enforce that. Like, nobody would know if you slipped me $500, which, you know, let me know, but, yeah, so I'm fine, absolutely fine with it being in there, but just keep in mind, there's no way to enforce that.
And it might be, if for some reason, through some type of investigation, they were able to get some records, or someone came in and said, yeah, I gave them this
I
amount of
don't
money for
think
that.
you could have access to someone's financial information for something at this level. I think it would be a lot deeper crime than something in an ethics policy, so. I mean,
How about ethics education?
yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Real quickly, there was a question about how the council members and the advisory board members would know about the code. It would be up to the EAB chair to get a copy of the code to a newly elected council member when, before they took office or as they were taking office. And then advisory board members would need to receive those within 30 days of the member's appointment. We would try to do it upon the time they're appointed, but this gives a little bit of leeway because sometimes it's harder to get to advisory board members.
Bob, can I ask a question that I just thought of?
Yeah.
First of all, this ethics advisory board chair, this is turning into quite the cumbersome role for someone. I mean, this is a job. Who's gonna? Because it just made me think, I mean, you know, when we go, think of how many appointments we all present, and now this person's gonna have to make sure they get the information and in the right amount of time, and, you know, and I've heard they're gonna do this, and then they're gonna tell me if I can go to that, and, I mean, I just see, like, the duties of this person. I mean, they probably need, like, a position description just to make sure they're checking all the boxes. Who's going to staff them to make sure that this is all getting done?
In all likelihood, our office would staff that person.
Okay. Yeah, I'm having mounting concerns that this position is turning into a lot for a volunteer in our community who's, you know, probably already busy, so.
Oh, yeah.
And I, you know, we'll make it work, and we'll have somebody appointed, we'll have a week to vet it, and we'll, you know, and maybe that's part of the process, is learn more about how much time they have, and to be able to do the role effectively, but just kind of wanted to raise that concern.
And you know, Councilmember Tuttle, I think this is where that one-year evaluation becomes really important.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, we'll know, there might not be, I'm hoping, there won't be anything for this person to do.
Well, but even if there's no violations, they still have to answer our questions about different things, and then also to make sure that newly advisory board members get information.
all of that, yeah.
So I mean, they're always going to have something to do,
Something,
even if
that's
nothing's going, if there's no
They're
inappropriate
basically
behavior.
overseeing a process and making sure that it's in place.
And if we want to cut down on that, I think that we have to have a conversation about what is truly purposeful ethical behavior and what is just like preferred conduct, right? Like, and I don't think there's going to be a problem. I don't mind this being in here. I get it. But are we really going to call a ethics board if someone sells like an item on Etsy using a city-owned computer during lunch break? Like, does that right now, is that the same level of, in this policy, the way it's presented today, that's the same level of ethical violation as someone pretty much taking a bribe, right? Like, I think we wind up, and I'm okay with it all, like, don't get me wrong, I'm a little worried about the internet, if we don't make sure that the cyberbullying stuff isn't more pointed, and I think it's a little cleaner language than was originally put in. Like, are we really going to call this board together every time someone, I guess, feels that something wasn't based on fact that was said online, you know, because that, we know, it could be somewhat subjective. We're just getting off this mask mandate policy where we had medical fact. We had real fact science to go off of, and and that became so political that those facts weren't seen as real facts. So are we really going to call this volunteer up, create this council every time someone feels, I guess, that the facts went 100% over a post on the internet? So I'm just worried about the same word that Councilmember Tuttle has, where, you know, we want to make it so that folks know that they can do business with the city, and that the city elected officials won't have a undue bias, right? That they will get a fair shot of doing business with the city, and they don't have to, I guess, wine and dine us. They don't have to build these outside relationships, while also offering transparency. And that's what I think the core of this does, but I do worry about the other stuff goes in it that seems to somewhat, I don't know, add more work to a volunteer.
I know. It seems to me you have to have some gatekeeper to address the kind of issues you've talked about and other council members have talked about. Whether it's a frivolous claim or it's something that's of not any significance, someone has to make that determination. And I don't think that you want the staff to make that determination. That's not appropriate. And so at this point, it falls on the shoulders of the chair with consultation of an outside legal counsel. Again, it's a matter of how people tend to use this. If this is used to victimize folks illegitimately, then, you know, that's a worry that I've heard from multiple people. And so you're right. I think it's, as you adopt this, statements regarding you want to be above reproach, you don't want to see this used as a weapon. Instead, this is meant to make sure that we all are following ethical standards, and those standards are established by the Code of Ethics.
So do we have something in here that addresses the abuse of this ethics policy?
Well, we don't in terms of any consequences to someone who files frivolous complaints. All we say is those won't see the light of day because they'll be stopped before they ever go to investigation.
So, yeah, so long as the chair determines them.
Correct. Right.
I'm like I said, I'm just worried with some of the language that might, and I'd be interested if we're going to have staff relook at to try to figure out what that language might do, like what, like I think the word inappropriate could be thrown in when it comes to utilizing, for example, city-owned computers, right? Like, are we really going to, I guess, hammer down on someone who, like I said, sells something on Etsy during lunch break, or should we, if it's something more malice than that, should we then hammer down on it? And
well, again, I'm not sure how we do that without having somebody as a gatekeeper to establish those standards, because frankly, if you're a city employee, that's against our policy, right? So, but for your group, you either have to outline where that line is, or you have to trust somebody to draw that line for you.
And when designing this, that gatekeeper, that trust, was the academic body and the body of practice that's currently in effect when it comes to ethic policies, particularly through our sister cities. I think some of the stuff that gets thrown here is just like a good idea someone had, with a unintended consequence of pretty much weaponizing this, or I guess creating more work. So I would like to know if what in here isn't actually part of like the standards of ethics through the ethics policies which inspired this one. Like I think that it's all done in good faith, and these are all behaviors that we should all be adherent to, but I worry about the idea, like ethics and preferred behavior and decorum, like these are all technically things we all should be following, but they're also like different levels of behavior. Is this truly the path that we want to determine what is fact and what's not in a tweet, right? Like, or is this, or should this board be focused more on, hey, we got a complaint that you took a private plane from somebody who wants, to and from a vacation resort from someone who wants to do business with the city, and we need to look at that. Like, that's kind of what we were going at here. So
is there an opportunity here, Mayor, to maybe we weight these? If you put a post out there that maybe something on social media that wasn't negative, maybe we don't need to put the whole board together, but maybe you get an email that say, hey, that probably wasn't in good taste. Maybe you rethink that, compared to you just took the trip to Florida and okay, we're gonna have to get the whole committee together, and you know, this looks like a finable thing. So maybe we need to weight these somehow.
No, and I agree. I think the weighting is where you put them, to be honest. And I'm being just completely honest with a policy opinion here, is when we get into the code of ordinance and we get into 2.04, it's the, it's how, as a council, we conduct ourselves through decorum, right? And so it even says like utmost courtesy to each other, and to the employees. So this here, though, it's law because it's in a code book, but it's not exactly ethics. Do we need an ethics board to determine that? So if we're talking, let's say, about behavior online and want to kind of bring behavior that's becoming of an elected official to ensure that that behavior also extends online, not just in person, then, in my opinion, I would put it in the conduct, under the section, conduct of council business. So this is how we conduct our business. And then also I would say, you know, probably usage of stuff like city Wi-Fi or something like that. That should also go under the conduct of business. We have to figure out what is, and separate the two. Like, we want this behavior, but one is about ethics. What is the standardized, acceptable Western ethical view on the, and then what is pretty much the behavior we also want? Because they're two different things. Not all great behavior has to be ethical behavior. Like, ethics is its own, I guess, if we get it, it's its own lane as well. So I think some of this bleeds into what could be considered decorum, what could be considered just standard behavioral practices that we expect.
If we're going to go in this direction, then we probably do need to have a follow-up conversation, because, for instance, Mayor, what you talked about, ordering something online at lunch hour, I would read M as saying you can't do that. It says never use city equipment or resources for activities outside of official duties, right? I mean,
Right.
so now the question that, you know, what comes up from that discussion and what Councilmember Blubaugh talked about is, does that resort to a level where someone finds out that you did that, you ordered something online, and I'm going to file a formal complaint against you? Or is that considered a tier 2 violation? I don't know. I mean, that's, if we're going to go down that road, then we're going to need to dig down deeper so I get intent from council.
And it's difficult. Did you order something on a lunch break, or were you looking at pornography on your computer?
Right.
You know, I mean, it opens up a lot.
Well, and that's what I mean is we shouldn't be in the business of figuring out like what is more important, A or B, right? A is to be dedicated to the ideals of honor, integrity, public and personal relationships. B is conduct themselves so as to maintain public confidence in the performance of the job duties. Like, those are the ethical standards. And then you jump down to someone who checks their email on their state computer or city computer. We can all agree that that's not the same. The violation of that is not the same ethically, I'm sure, as the violation of these other things. So when we talk about, I think, ethics as an ethics policy, we have to, I think, dive just a little deeper to what ethics actually is and what it means. And I think that instead of trying to tear them off in the same policy, we might just want to use some of this other conduct that's really not ethical in nature. It's more just proper conduct into maybe the conduct of council business, and that's already outlined in our code book. So I don't mean to split hairs here, but again, like, what is ethical and what is preferred business are two different things.
Right.
Okay, you're not unethical if you sold something on using city Wi-Fi on FC during your lunch break. That's not unethical. Like, is that something that we would rather discourage? Sure, right? But is that the same as accepting a bribe in exchange for a vote on a contract? No. Like, one is clearly unethical and wrong. One's just, it's wrong, but no one should, I guess, pull the board together and investigate that.
Wouldn't
mindful
some
that
people
we're
be
in-
reflective of how you treat your own staff? You know, what action would you take against your own staff for ordering something online? Probably not a big deal.
Oh, no, it would be
Oh,
a
it
big
is,
deal
okay.
if it's reported that there is an improper use of city resources.
Okay.
Supervisor would spend time with that person. If it's
Okay.
there a pattern of behavior, you'd probably check their IT record and, again, but our standard is our standard, right? And we've been really clear that the council needs to establish expectations here. I'm mindful that we are way into the lunch hour. The one thing I will, since we were talking about that.
You're key
but,
today, Bob.
But I truly believe that this all hinges on getting a trusted person in that chair position. Because I believe that's the person who's going to establish how this gets administered and brings that semblance of order to this. And, the idea was that you're going to get somebody above reproach, someone who has a track record, who understands all of this. It could be a retired judge, it could be a retired attorney, it could be someone that was a member of the Hugo Wall staff. I mean, or one of the other universities, and taught ethics. I mean, there's a whole, but you're talking about somebody at a higher level that would have an understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve with this. And I think that person, if everybody agrees that that's the trusted person, I think you could try to fine tune this to a point where you'll be here 6 months from now.
No, and I understand the hour, and it's unfortunate that we spent a lot of time discussing stuff that wasn't germane to this particular document. So I get we're going over, but really this is the stuff we should be talking about.
Yeah.
And so with that, I would be interested also in a severity clause put in, where particularly on Q, if we actually keep cyberbullying in there, in the court, let's say I say something about masks and I guess take a jab on my private Facebook about a member who just won't wear masks even though it's the law. And that person says, you're not cyberbullying me and we're gonna go through the whole ethical process, and then I wound up taking it to court and saying, hey, I have the First Amendment right to say what I want and I don't surrender those rights here, even if you feel sad about it. Then I want to make sure that this policy stays through a severity clause, that they could just strike Q, because that part really isn't constitutional. You can't regulate what people say online. And in doing that, I don't want the entire ethics policy to be struck down because that or something else if it gets challenged in court, which it would be. I don't want the entire ethics policy being struck down. I'd rather have a clause in there so that if one part of this was seen as unconstitutional, the rest of it would still stand.
But if an elected or somebody from their campaign is going out and doing numerous picture and video manipulation and distortion and putting it out there online, I think that should be, and we've seen a ton of cases of this in the last year. It's everywhere.
No, I agree with you. It's bad. That's why we have, the Kansas Ethics Commission, investigates any type of, and so does federally. Like, you can't put it out on television that's proven inaccurate. I get that. What I'm saying though is the way this language is, it's not about really inaccurate information. It's about you have to feel bullied to enact the fact, not include altered text, pictures or videos. It's just, it's very wide. It's a very wide brush, and frankly, it's because it's that wide. You could literally, if my wife said something critical on Facebook about an elected official, you can now drag me into a ethics hearing on this, and they could rule against me and make me have a fine, and that is absolutely would get trampled on in court, because I can't go call my wife and regulate her First Amendment rights online because you felt upset about it. So that's, and I'm okay keeping it in here. You know, I think my bullying amendment also like stems from this. Like, I don't think we would have thought about this if it wasn't for the discussion on bullying. But it's, I also think it's going to be considered unconstitutional, and I want to make sure we preserve the rest of the document by having some type of clause in there that if any item in here is considered unconstitutional, the rest of the intent is that the rest of the document still stands.
I mean, I thought this would be something actually you'd be in favor of, Mayor, because you went through this to the point where you've filed a lawsuit against individuals for doing this against you. So I would think that you would want to make sure at the elected level that we make sure that this doesn't continue.
I mean, you endorsed those people that same day, so I'm not sure if you and I
I
share values
endorse
on
those
them.
people?
Share values on that, but, so I'd
I'm sorry, can you
appreciate-
clarify your point? I endorsed those people?
My understanding is on Facebook, the day we named those people, you went out and said that you defended those people. So I just want to say,
I think you're
I don't.
incorrect, Mayor. Please stay factual.
On the day those were named, you went out and endorsed. We're a text message exchange where you and I talk about this. Do you want me to read that text message?
Absolutely. Read that text message, sir.
Okay.
While he's pulling that up, Bob, is there any more slides for this?
Yes,
Workshop.
there's one more.
Whistleblower.
If I can, the last one has to do with whistleblower protection. And this simply says that anybody that files a complaint, if a current or former official or employee believes, who discloses information that he or she reasonably believes is a violation of law, mismanagement, or substantial or specific danger, presents substantial danger to the public, that there will be no retaliation against that person. It protects them. There's a similar protection for our employees that is in our code of ethics, or will be in our code of ethics. So it, again, it's to create that protective environment for those who have complaints.
With this whistleblower, or I guess is the process through the chair and not through our legal counsel, or?
If it's well, what we'll do is we have to establish, if you adopt this, we're going to establish an independent process so that someone can call into a phone number that's not addressed by the staff or by elected officials.
And that will be shared with, employee-wise, all of our employees?
All of our employees and the public.
Okay.
That's all I have.
So I have one other thing while they're still looking that up. And I'd just like to ask, well, first of all, on the fine, the $100 to $1,000 fine, did you guys in your research and staff research, did you see any place where they perhaps use community service or something else besides a fine?
That's interesting.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I don't know if there was an opportunity.
I was asking staff. Yeah.
Right, but, okay, go ahead, ask staff then.
Hayes, Kansas allows for some administrative remedy. So that would allow for an alternative, but that's probably applying to staff more than it is an official.
But most of them are fines. Is that what you're saying? Most of them are they?
Some actually imprisonment as well.
Imprisonment,
Yeah.
oh.
That takes the chair's role to a whole new level.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, no.
Colorado Springs, I'm sorry, just as an aside, the fine is no more than double the amount of financial equivalent of any benefits obtained by unethical actions, which I thought was an interesting standard.
Yeah.
Since it's kind of like they're all over the place.
Yep.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
I'm not seeing that, but I think that's a reasonable consideration as well, if that's where you want to
Yeah.
go. I will tell you, there are a lot of things that have been added here. I don't see how I'm gonna do this justice by next Tuesday. It'd have to be done by Friday to get to you. I'd like an extra week to look through this and make sure I've identified all of these and provided responses for you to consider.
I think
That's
that
all
seems
right.
reasonable. I mean, if we're gonna do this, I think it's important, it's imperative that we do it well. And again, going back to what Councilmember Claycomb said, you know, we'll revisit it annually and we'll probably think of other things or see other policies that happen or have situations that make us wanna pause and pivot. But I think that seems reasonable.
So that would be February 9th.
Yes.
So February 9th will be
For you to formally consider this, the changes and the timetable for your engagement.
so that would be the next draft then, that won't be.
Right, we'll get it to you in advance. I just don't see how I'm gonna do it justice because of some of the issues that now come up between now and Friday. So I wanna make sure I have time to look at some issues for you.
Okay.
I think, I know you said to kick this to the end of the meeting, so since the presentation was done. This actual document hadn't been seen by the public for enough time. We've all had discussions about ethics, but not an actual sheet. I would like to see, rather than looking at, 30, 45, or 60 days, that each DAB just has an opportunity to weigh in. And if we're waiting until February 9th, that would mean, at least for District 1, 3, and 6, I believe, it'd have to be March for those DABs.
District 2.
And
Yep.
District 2. So if each DAB just had an opportunity to weigh in on the modified document that you bring back to council on the 9th. So on the 9th, when we see it, we would see what you've added from today's discussion. Then could they see that at the next DAB
When would the
meeting?
first DAB be of that month?
In March, I'm not sure, because I have DAB Monday for District 1.
Do you guys have an NLC in there that might interfere?
NLC, I believe, is virtual this year.
Okay.
They haven't changed that yet.
Do you have the DAB?
Mine would be March 1st.
Yeah, March 1st.
So with that, then what, can we think about what would be the soonest we could get stuff for a vote?
I have to have this done by the Friday before the 9th, right? So that's what, the.
The 6th, or the 5th, sorry.
5th. So would there be any DABs before that?
So we have ours Monday. The
Ours
only concern I have with DAB 3 is I know they're gonna call a special meeting for an appointment, and that's probably gonna take their whole evening. So
Will that be the February meeting though? Wouldn't that be their February DAB meeting? Yeah, so we could take it to the DABs in March? Is that what I hear you saying?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, if
So
wanna
you
go
would
to
come to
DAB
council,
Pardon me?
you would come to council on the 9th.
Right.
With that document,
Right.
and then I would say that document goes to the DABs for March.
Oh, okay, fine. I thought you were trying to get it in February.
No,
Okay.
no, no.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
Never mind, I'm fine.
But that gives them time, so, like our normal process with stuff, as the council hears the new draft on the 9th, then that gives folks at least 2 weeks before DAB to review that, have a lively discussion at DAB, for the first DABs, and then the rest of March, the rest of the DABs. Then that would come back to council, I think, at that point, because now we've went out to the public with an actual document, with feedback from that document. And then I think I would be more comfortable voting on it at that point, because then our DABs have weighed in.
And then also by that point, we more than likely will have a District 3 representative.
Yeah.
So they'll have an opportunity to hear from constituents in that district as well, so.
Okay, so.
What would
then
you lead
would
you
be
to
the date?
believe, what would lead you to believe this would be a lively conversation?
Oh, today,
I would like to make a comment, Bob, that I know that, I don't know the amount, but I know that you and your team, management fellows and legal, put a great deal of time and research into this, and for that, I'm greatly appreciative for everything that you did to kind of lead us through this process and listen to all of our concerns. I can see a little bit that we did our council chat on Friday, and we talked about how every person on this council has some sort of footprint in this policy, and I think that's what will make it better and make it a document that at the end is very strong and we're all proud of. So I do want to make sure that staff is recognized for their tremendous amount of time and effort into this document. So thank you.
So, I think some of the takeaways too is that we need to immediately start on campaign finance reform and start that discussion, hopefully get a workshop on. I would definitely be interested in limiting the influence of LLCs, particularly those that are non-reporting and skirting the ethics laws. Would also be interested in possibly revisiting our previous ethics policy, or not ethics, but campaign finance policy, and having a discussion on that. I really think that this discussion here showed that we should have that discussion as well, and I absolutely think the public wants us to do so. And with that, I think we have the feedback that we've asked to be incorporated into the next document. And just roughly, perhaps the Vice Mayor will know, with the dates and everything, do we have a goal? Seems like people want to wait till next month to talk to their DABs, get 2 weeks worth of, I guess, policy discussion generated, and then get a open discussion going, and then bring that back. So are we thinking April? April or into March are we thinking to
approve?
actually act on, I guess, a final version of this?
Mayor, I had intended to put together a schedule for you. DABs are part of it. I don't know, we may want to use a social media town hall for this. I don't know what tool would be right to solicit feedback or what tools, but I'd like to get with our communication staff and give you what you asked for, and that is suggestions so that we have a schedule for you to react to. You may say it's overboard or not enough, but I'd like to be able to do that, and I can get that done for next week, and we'll present that to you. It's just all of these changes that I just can't get done until, in the next couple of days. But I can get that, some suggestion on engagement for you.
Okay. So March, is that what I'm hearing? What's the expectation to move forward with trying to, I guess,
So without a written timeline right now, February 9th, we would see the document that Bob and other staff members are modifying. That would kick DAB into March. So we have 3 DABs on March 1st. I can't remember everyone else's DAB. So potentially the March 16th council meeting or April 6th council meeting, I would think, probably more so April 6th. We'll give time for all the DAB feedback, all the CSRs to make sure all the minutes are done and that council can review those before we make the final decision.
okay.
And then I would also think maybe with that, if this is not too much, Bob, that maybe April's workshop then could be, let's start on campaign finance discussion, or we do a retreat in April if it's not the workshop.
In campaign finance, since it falls under state law, I'd love to see if we could figure out if there's an expert on campaign finance law, because it is outside of city and county law. If we could really get into, I think, the nuts and bolts of what a political action committee is and the limitations of that, really get into, I guess, self-reporting for LLCs, like, I guess really get everyone caught up on the knowledge about the ins and outs of how our current Kansas statutes work, and then what we can do on the city level to curb the influence of money in our local campaigns.
And this is just a brainstorm. Sometimes there are bad ideas in brainstorming, but it might be interesting too to have someone from the Kansas Ethics Commission come.
Or even a retired person if we can't get the person who runs Kansas Ethics right now. I know he just had a baby. It would be interested if the previous chair, if she was around or interested, and she could probably give us an overview as well. All right, any more discussion on this?
Bob, was that timeline I mentioned close or too rushed, or?
No, I think if you're gonna do, just because you're doing March DABs doesn't mean we can't do other engagement, either before or during that same period.
Okay.
And I did, like, I think you mentioned maybe a social media town hall. Maybe Vice Mayor and I can do another council chat or two. But yeah, I think there's going to be because to get people to understand it. I mean, think of how much robust debate there was from us, and we are entrenched in this every day. The district advisory boards aren't going to be others. So, but I do really want to make one more comment. I think it's really great that we are having the district advisory board weigh in, because they'll be following this as well, right? And so instead of imposing it upon them, we're asking them for their feedback and engagement. So I'm really glad we're going in that direction.
I'm appreciative of today's conversation. Lots of things talked about, lots of good feedback given. Although we missed lunch, but I thought today was a good conversation.
When will we be looking at the effectiveness of this?
Oh, we would want it to get into effect probably as soon as possible, right? Like what, that's a good question. And when, if we pass it, how quickly can we get it in effect?
The reason I ask is because I'm anxious to see our minutes from today's meeting, because on the record, I was told that I endorsed the behavior of the former council member without evidence. And to me, that's an unethical statement.
Okay, well, I'll read you on Wednesday, October 14th, you wrote on Facebook, I would encourage you to look at both sides of the story, the timing, the evidence before passing judgment. Please, no negative comments either way, or they will be deleted, which means you were going to also censor your post. And then you went ahead and you tagged the cake story titled, County Commissioner Responds to Lawsuit Over. Do you remember making that post?
Yes, I said keep an open mind. I didn't want negative comments either way.
Right. Sounds like you...
That is not an endorsement of that behavior, Mayor.
Okay, I can get you the other post you made about who you would have voted for during that time, if that would help. But hopefully we can do that when we're not in a meeting.
Well, that's fine. We can go through all the examples of cyberbullying, and you can tell me whether this is your team that has put this picture and video manipulation together from everybody from the Secretary of State of the United States to almost every elected in this city. We can talk about how you're making fun of me on council about a council member crying about things on social media while you have an active lawsuit. I'd be glad to share all this with you and we can discuss it. Because, frankly, I don't like the hypocrisy.
Tell me more. No, I want to see him. You want to drag this out further, or you want to end on that note?
No, we can discuss it in private, or we can discuss it off on the bench. Just want to make sure that you understand what we're speaking about with the picture and video manipulation.
So you feel bullied?
Not me personally.
No, none of these are about you.
On all the elected officials.
So, Councilman, no, let's have this conversation. Do you expect that the ethics policy to keep council members in line is going to also shield your friend Michael O'Donnell? Because these are all attacks against Michael O'Donnell during a campaign cycle. And this is political. My understanding is these are political ads that you pointed out. Do you think that your amendment for cyberbullying would also extend into, regulating campaigns? Is that your intent?
I'd like to share these with the public. This is a lot more than Michael O'Donnell. This is Lindy Wells. This is the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. This is former Mayor Jeff Longwell.
Right, it looks like you printed out a bunch of campaign stuff, but I mean...
This is Senator Roger Marshall. This is Representative Patrick Penn. I mean, this is Representative Nick Hoheisel. I'm only saying if your team is behind this, the individuals that you pay from your PAC, if these are the individuals, then you need to denounce this behavior.
You're kidding me, right? You want me to actually accuse a city official of doing this, my team as mayor, of doing this, and then you want me to denounce the First Amendment rights of people to express political opinions by using comedy? Are we now going? Should I also denounce the cartoonist who writes for the Eagle? Would you want that denouncement because they also draw cartoons of Michael O'Donnell?
I'd say we need to look into this. If you're campaign is paying
My
the
campaign,
cartoonist.
my campaign finance report was just reported. Did you see any campaign activities on that you were pointing out on this?
This is previous information, sir.
Well, you just said campaign. Like, tell me which, connect the dots. Let me know. You're making an accusation here that
I'm
obviously
I'm asking you.
meritless. I wasn't even running in these races here, at least the majority of them.
So
You're
was
saying
your-
that I'm the one who's responsible for an ad against James Clendenin for being unethical a week after you voted on him being confirmed as unethical. You were saying that for some reason I'm now in the wrong because someone else on the internet, like I control the entire internet, and someone else on the internet went and posted something like this, and because you want to associate that person as a supporter of me, now I need to make a statement on that. Is that what you're saying right now?
I'm saying if the people that you pay for your campaign to go out and do this picture and video manipulation of other electeds, then you should tell them to stop and you should stop paying them for doing this.
So what about the cartoonists? Should we also try to denounce cartoons, political cartoons?
If you're
or
paying the
memes?
Eagle cartoonist out of your Wichita campaign, I think we need to have a discussion about that. Is that ethical?
Not one of these are paid for by my campaign, or else they would have a paid for by on.
Okay.
So
Are they
you're
paid
finding,
for?
You're finding stuff here that you just found randomly on the internet, and because you don't understand the internet, or apparently campaign finance laws, you demonstrate quite well, you think that now I should be accountable for all the negative campaigning on the internet.
If you're paying those individuals, I do.
Right, but I'm not, because it'd have a pay for buy sign on it, wouldn't it? Because that would make it legal. I would have to require that.
You know, I think we'll leave it up to our media if they want to look
You
at
want to
your
try this with the
campaign
media?
report.
This gets to the root of pretty much your entire discussion today, is now that we're going to have a front page story where you can look like you got into a big old fight with the mayor, and you can feel like
Mayor, you
like
made
your
an
name got in the
accusation.
paper, huh?
You made an accusation against me that I endorse that behavior.
And I read you your statement with your link that you were
And it
endorsing
was,
that.
and it said, keep an open mind.
Right, but it didn't. It didn't, because we're going to get into the text messages. I have no problem taking you back to my office and teaching you about this and showing you all the back and forth and letting you, you know, it's a good show though, isn't it? You did a good job today.
I'm not putting on a show, sir.
Sure. Is there a motion to adjourn, or do people
No,
still
we're
want
in
to
a
hear about the
workshop.
council members' opinions on campaign finance?
We're in a workshop.
Yeah, bud.
I'm just pointing out hypocrisy. Don't.
Have them back.
That's an ethical situation right there.
It's not, because guess what? You slow down the ethics reform, so now we don't have any calls.